That fork was their chance to get it in.
But we're stuck with the Windows 3.0 of cryptocurrency.
We're all gonna scream and bitch and argue about all this stuff, but you can't change it.
There's hundreds of thousands of wallets that literally can't spend their Bitcoin right now because they have less than the network fee.
And I think Thamos was just sick of this shit, and moderators on Reddit are tyrants.
Look, if my butt pictures are not in 4K, then they might as well not even be on the blockchain. I swear this show is not just about cryptocurrency, but look, it's gonna happen quite a bit because it is the freedom technology. We need to free our currency to free the world. To be sovereign, we can't be under the thumb of a central bank that inflates our currency and puts us all in the poorhouse because of it and starts wars. And you know all these arguments because we've had them so much lately, but it's going to keep happening until we're free. So just strap in. Today, or actually recently, we had the privilege of speaking with Roger Ver. We had a great interview. I would suggest everybody go check that out. It was a fantastic interview in which I ended up agreeing with him on quite a bit. And the internet, half of the internet disagreed with it quite a bit. And a surprisingly large number of people suggested that we have a counter conversation with our guest for today. And as many of you know, my personal motto is that I would like to know and believe as many true things as I possibly can and as few false things as I possibly can. And that requires talking to people that think I'm wrong and having those discussions in good faith. And that is what we're here to do today. Let's get into it.
From Dallas, Texas, this is Anarchast.
Greetings, you paltry, tiniest, smallest of blocks. Welcome back to Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I will be Patrick Smith, and today's guest, welcome to the show, is Guy Swann. How are you?
What's up, boss? I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm having a good time, man. I'm here to have a good time. This is going to be a fun chat.
Oh yeah.
All right. So this is your first time on the show. And the first question I love to ask first-time guests that also happen to be anarchists is, how did you become an anarchist?
So it probably started, it was kind of gravitating that direction towards in college. And I actually think it was kind of the economics that led me there more than anything. My brother was taking economics in school, and we were living together at the time. So he would kind of come back to our place, and he was constantly conflicting with his professors. He'd be like, what you just taught today kind of makes what you taught us last week not work anymore. Like you're teaching us contradictory things. And then he's trying to, work his head around, define the edges of these ideas, and not able to actually make anything concrete out of it, because Keynesian economics is just so self-contradictory in so many different ways. Like macroeconomics is like different from microeconomics, as if physics is different because you made it bigger rather than make it smaller. Like that's not the case. So we would kind of like argue this back and forth, and we went on this kind of journey of like, we actually found MMT first, which was funny because MMT is actually a lot more intuitive than
What's
Keynesianism.
That? Oh, okay.
The
modern monetary theory. Yeah, okay.
The idea that the money is just a scoreboard, and so like you could just freely manipulate it. That's actually, I think it's Keynesianism taken to its logical conclusions to try to remove as many contradictions as possible. But then it fundamentally has like a really big flaw in the fact that the money isn't the capital. Like money is just access. It's just a proxy. Nobody eats money. Nobody builds a house out of money. Like it's just the allocation of it. So what you're actually doing is you're defrauding the accounting system of society and saying that somehow that's creating a net productivity gain because the people who you defraud it in favor of get more resources. It's like, well, of course they do.
There's that video going around Twitter. Have you seen that video on Twitter of that girl holding up a fiat currency, and she's like, "This is just plastic."
Okay, so you know what I don't fucking understand? This is what I don't understand. See this? See this? See that? This. This is worth $50? This is worth $5? This is the exact same piece of fucking plastic This is the same thing. We made up these arbitrary numbers, and then we said we can't print more, or else it'll be worthless. How about just don't let it be worthless? How about just don't tell anybody, or just like don't let it happen? We literally made this up. This is a construct we made up. Just don't let it inflate. Just don't. Like, people, I get inflate, but I don't. Like, just don't let it, fuck. You let this happen. You let this happen. How about you just let everything else happen too? Why don't you just let stuff not inflate? Like, just deflate it.
Why don't they just print more if we need more? And then she's like, and people are like, oh, then the value will go down. Well, why don't they just make it not go down? I'll put that meme here.
That's what we're dealing with. That's what we're
later.
dealing with.
Yeah, I mean,
for sure.
I mean, isn't that sort of like modern monetary theory though?
Oh, that's MMT, 100%. Yeah, but what I was saying is that MMT was more intuitive until we realized that fundamental flaw, and then that just led us to Austrian economics. So MMT was just kind of like a transitional step to taking the absurdity to its logical conclusion before realizing the fundamental flaw. And then we hit Austrian economics, and I was already kind of going down the libertarian route anyway. Like, I had been kind of in high school, you probably could have called me a liberal, like slightly in the social sense. And then
everybody is.
It was kind of like full on Republican, and like kind of like flag waving freedom sort of thing. And then everything after 9/11 and like that whole period from 2001 to the financial crisis was just like, what the hell? Like, there was just so many things seemed contradictory. Nothing seemed to line up. And then republicanism just seemed like such a joke to me. And I had a bit of an identity crisis and feeling like I lost what I thought the country meant to me. And I remember having like, when I kind of realized that, like, oh shit, America's kind of like the bad guy. Like the United States government is like a shithole. And I was kind of coming to terms with that. And I remember there was actually a Benjamin Franklin quote that I found one day in my like, all right, well, what the hell does any of this mean? What am I trying to figure out? I found a Benjamin Franklin quote that said, "Where liberty reigns, there is my country." And I was like, that's what it is. I had attached the country, the government, and the flag to the idea of liberty, but they're not relevant to each other. It was just my symbol for representing that thing, but I didn't lose the principles of liberty. I didn't lose the concept of liberty. I lost the symbol that I thought reflected it, you know? And so that was actually a big part of shifting that. And then it was Rothbard, Larkin Rose, like I just went down the whole Austrian economics and everything rabbit hole, and there was no turning back after that.
That's awesome. Do you remember the moment when, and I always ask this question because it was a real moment for me when I realized I was an anarchist, but do you remember that moment? What was that like? Was it, how did you feel when you were like, wait a second, am I an anarchist? Is that what I am?
I'll tell you to begin with, I just felt better than everybody else. And I went down this like little path of like I know things that other people don't know. And then I kind of got humbled a couple of times and just like kind of putting my foot in my mouth. And I was just like, you know, we're a product of what we're exposed to, you know, like you only get to the better idea by being in conflict with a different idea, you know? So if no one ever challenges your ideas, or you never actually stand up to it and kind of put it to the test and beat the thing to death until you know, see what's left over after you beat the shit out of all of your ideas. Like, conflict leads to conclusion. It leads to being able to define that edge, you know? And so I realized that I couldn't really blame other people for not. And then I kind of like set back on my ass and be like, I'm not special because of this. But, and it was almost even depressing too, because it was like, oh, the way that would actually be the moral and better way for it to work is not the way it works. So it's, you grow up thinking that the good guys always won and the way it should be is the way it is. And then you realize that's not the case. It's a little bit depressing at first. You know, you kind of feel lonely. But you know, I guess the process of life is dealing with what is real and learning to accept that. I mean, the platitude of, give me the strength of accepting, the strength to change what I can and be able to accept what I can't, sort of thing.
We talk about the Stoics quite a bit on this channel. Yeah. And my journey was quite the same. I think everybody that comes out of state school comes out somewhat liberal, just because that's how the system is set up and the social environment is set up. It pumps out lefties, and I was raised Republican, so that was kind of I went through that phase, and then for me,
default for sure. Yeah.
For me, it was police sort of abusing their power that made me question where they got their authority, and then I did all the reading that you're talking about. So having that battle of ideas, a lot of people hate and they denounce and they say it's bad and it's divisive and it tears down communities, and that can be true if it's done improperly. But if it's done in good faith between people that recognize the other person isn't evil and they're actually working towards liberty as well, then the debate becomes a superpower, because we're able to refine our ideas faster and better and make them sharper than the other ideas and improve the world faster. So that's what we're here to do today, is to see and talk about the other side of this whole Bitcoin freedom tech argument. So you are an entrepreneur, you're a filmmaker. You have 2 podcasts, I believe, Bitcoin Audible and an artificial intelligence one. What was the name of that one?
AI Unchained. Yeah.
Nice. You're into economics, cryptography, game theory, P2P networking, and you talk about the principles of liberty behind Bitcoin and other tech. So let's get into it. What is your background? How did you get involved with Bitcoin?
Well, I actually went to school for film, but found after moving out to I just loved to tell stories. And I loved explaining things and stuff. Like I would kind of thrive when I had to give a presentation, when I was younger. And I loved story, because I recognized that, how we relate to everything, like story is kind of the foundation of what we are. Like how we think about ourselves. Nobody thinks about a chair as its component pieces. People think about a chair as like, this is a comfortable place to sit. This is something that's in my way. Like, you tell a story about how it relates to you. And you necessarily have to, like, everything essentially is a narrative of some sort. How do we relate to the things around us? And story is what gives things meaning as well. So I was always loved story, loved film, loved books, and went to school to kind of understand the psychology and practical production of that. But went out to LA, and the culture was not a fit. I didn't really like the environment. Everything was so expensive, even back then. And I didn't see a way of, like, I wanted to tell my stories and do what I wanted to do, not work on somebody else's crappy project. So ended up coming back home, not sure what to do. Did my own little media business for a while. Then I was always like super techie. Like, we did Science Olympiad for years. In fact, I learned more in the science and math competitions in high school than I did in high school, like far and away, building robots and bridges and stuff. So I started to go back that route because, engineering, technical stuff, like, it pays. And became a network technician, went kind of sysadmin route. And then somewhere in the midst of all of that, I stumbled upon Bitcoin. And then increasingly, it just took more and more of my attention. Started about 2011 days. Roger Ver was a big early influencer. I loved some of his early talks. In fact, a video I did like a million years ago, actually used a really great clip of him about, like, nobody can stop it, nobody can turn it off or whatever, at the end of a really, really fun little video. I don't even know if it's out there anymore. I have no idea if I could find a copy of it, but it would be fun to do so if I could. I'd like to see it after a decade. And then Bitcoin just kind of took over. Started the podcast just kind of on a whim, because the original idea was that like there was so much great content, writing, research papers, books, you name it, about Bitcoin that was kind of finally coming on the scene, and none of it was available in audio. And I had hours and hours all day to listen to stuff in podcasts, audiobooks, but I could not find any Bitcoin content. So I created, originally it was called Crypto Economy, but eventually Bitcoin Audible, because that's the title that actually makes sense. And I would just read it aloud and then do commentary on it afterward. And like, 10,000 hours of reading and recording and everything later, like 15 books, 6 or 17 books, maybe, 1,000 articles. I don't know, just there's a shit ton. I've been doing it for like 6 years. So
and that's why you said people call you the guy that's read more than anybody else on crypto.
Yeah. Nice. Proof of work. I got
it. Yeah, there you go. All right, cool. So, let's get into Bitcoin and the topic of the conversation. So, the best place to start is kind of where I tried to start with Ver, though that conversation was really driven by the narrative in his book. But this one, I think we just start with the core fundamental disagreement, which is basically the purpose of Bitcoin. What is the purpose of Bitcoin, and who says it is what, is that purpose? What do you think?
Gotcha. So the problem with I don't think anybody can say what the purpose of Bitcoin is. And the major part of the disconnect is in observing versus dictating. And obviously, what we want Bitcoin to be is not necessarily what it is, as far as a technical, as a protocol itself. And I think a lot of the disconnect comes there. Like Satoshi, obviously everybody, and one of the things that I find kind of disingenuous about the argument is that people will point to, like one of the examples in the book was that Dan Held said that it's supposed to be a store of value. Nobody, with respect to Dan, nobody gives a shit what he thinks. And the broad majority of everybody, it's about what's the best way to achieve a global payment system that cannot be shut down, that is stateless, and has a money that cannot be controlled. It has a separation of money and state. I think that's the ultimate goal, is how do we separate our monetary, financial, and payment systems from central control of the state, of violent actors. And one of the, so in regards to what Bitcoin is versus what we want it to be, is Bitcoin, the network, like as it is designed, is a series of a whole stack of different trade-offs to achieve different goals. There are trade-offs to achieve the fact that we know the money cannot be cheated, and that the money is 21 million and it cannot be inflated. And I think that is the priority beyond anything else, because everything else is gone if you do not have that. It doesn't matter if you can transact freely, if you cannot prove that the money you have is actually in a monetary base that hasn't been manipulated. And that you cannot enforce that either. So there's a lot of a lot of the elements of Bitcoin are actually in contest with each other. And that's a big part of the problem of the scaling of Bitcoin. But a different problem in kind of the historical disagreement is the framing that this is about small blocks versus large blocks, when a big part of the argument was actually, if you kind of dig into what the small blockers, see, it's so hard to not use the framing. The small blockers were saying is that it was far more about keeping consensus at the protocol layer rather than resorting to consensus at the social layer, because social layer consensus sucks. Social layer consensus is easily manipulated, it is easily controlled, and is easily dominated by the state. Because violent power will easily sway, and censorship will easily sway social opinion. So the question is the consensus of the protocol a priority, or are we going to arbitrarily change it, which is one of the most dangerous things. Like, this is nuclear grade software. This is, how do we build something that no matter what we throw at it, we still have a global network. We can all still access it. It's all still censorship resistant. It still has 21 million. And if you post a transaction and get it confirmed, it cannot be undone. And it's not a simple matter of, it's actually really bad as a payment network in contrast to its monetary security. So maybe I'll let you clarify a second question before I go too far, because we could go down quite a bit of a rabbit hole here. I do want to hit on the dynamics of security.
I don't have any hard stops if you don't, so I'm not concerned. I mean, like, let me know if you're time constrained, and I'll definitely focus the interview more. But I want to let you have all the time you need to talk about all the different pieces of this that are relevant.
Okay.
So I don't want to move off of the purpose of Bitcoin just yet. And your answer was that no one can really answer that question. Is, in my opinion, half very true, and part of the problem, and half untrue, in that there is a specific group of people that have decided what the purpose is and have implemented that purpose. And to say that the purpose they've implemented is anything other than what it is sort of self-delusory. What do you have to say about those 2 points?
Okay, so probably the easiest way to frame it, or to address the frame of Bitcoin was going to be this, or it was this, and then it got changed, is that fundamentally what happened at the protocol layer is that the Bitcoin Cash, everybody who was trying to fork Bitcoin was fundamentally attempting to change the protocol. Regardless of what we socially or subjectively want it to be, they were trying to change the protocol without consensus on changing it, and then they forked off. They fundamentally were just not able to change the bulk of the network. So what they were trying to do, the direction they were trying to take it in, which was explicitly an alteration. Otherwise it wouldn't have been a fork. Simply didn't succeed. And for better or for worse, that's what decentralization is. And those 5 people, like whoever said to the developers, they did not decide what it was going to be, because it did not fundamentally change from exactly what it was. Those clients still work today. Some of them are still running. So again, the question is, are we running this by social consensus or protocol consensus? Because I think the unbelievable power and innovation of the Bitcoin system is that protocol consensus trumps social consensus, because social consensus sucks. That's what we have right now. That's what fiat money is money in the social sphere. And when you have money in the social sphere, it's easy to dominate. It's easy to control. And gradually leads, or well, just infinitely leads towards centralization. And the most powerful thing that Bitcoin did was establish a monetary foundation, a monetary policy that was not alterable through a shallow, short-term social consensus. That the protocol determined the rules, and then everyone is only able to fight within those rules. And any changes that are made can only occur within those rules. And anybody who tries to break those rules are necessarily forking off. And if they do not get overwhelming support to do that, the change simply doesn't succeed. And I think Bitcoin's success in the market is what it is showing us. And I genuinely believe this, and this is my priority as well. We talk about like privacy being a huge part of this issue, right? Like, this was cypherpunks, like a huge part of the whole reason Bitcoin exists is because people were trying to figure out how to make private transactional systems. Peer-to-peer payments and peer-to-peer cash. This was a huge part of the philosophy that led to this. You got 30 years of history of people trying to figure this out. But ultimately, if you do not create your own money, these two things don't work. they completely fall apart. You don't get any transactional or privacy measures that matter to any degree if someone can still completely cheat the fundamental system or control the fundamental system to manipulate and steal as much capital out of the system as possible. Because counterfeiting currency is just taking money out of the economic, or taking actual capital out of the economic system by defrauding the accounting system, right? Like you're just stealing. Like if I'm printing money, if you're working to make money and then you spend it, you're specifically putting in capital into the economic pool of resources, and then you're only able to take out what you put in. If I'm counterfeiting money, then I'm just able to take out as much as I want and never put anything in. I'm literally the only one not participating in society. I'm defrauding it to get all of the goods and services. Most foundational thing that needs to happen is to protect the 21 million of Bitcoin, is to protect the protocol consensus above all else. And unfortunately, this is at odds with the ability to verify the bandwidth cost and the ability to have network security. So there's a bunch of different elements that need to be secure for Bitcoin to be nuclear grade, cannot shut it down, nobody can stop it software. And there's kind of like a systemic one, which is cryptography, but it's static, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just kind of always, if the cryptographic primitives are broken, good luck, we're all screwed. There is the social consensus, which rests on top of the protocol, not in the protocol, but on top of it. And then you have network security. Can you connect to it? Can you access it? Are you on the same Bitcoin as everybody else? Then you have verification security. Do you know that your transaction is valid, that the signatures are valid, that everything that goes into it, does this actually originate from somewhere that's meaningful? Because the whole thing's a digital system. If you don't know if you have real Bitcoin, if you can't prove that you have real Bitcoin, you can't prove that you have anything. The fact that you have a UTXO and that you're the only one who can sign it is completely arbitrary. You know, if you can get that on a Google spreadsheet, right? Then you have economic security, which I guess you can kind of call that proof of work. Probably kind of falls under the economic security. You have transactional security. That's one that's a huge part of the peer-to-peer cash problem, right? Is we want everybody to be able to make a transaction. We want everybody to be able to own their own UTXO, and we want this to be easy to use without question. Then we have the economic security. Are the incentives aligned? Do we have enough economic defense for this network? And then ultimately we have monetary security, which I think is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. Because if you don't have monetary security, your economic security is meaningless. If you don't have monetary security, then what are your transactions of? Transactions are just proof of ownership of something. This is what it's proof of ownership of. So if you don't have this, you don't have this. You also don't have this. And if you have network security, but you don't have monetary security, you don't know if it's 21 million, well, then it doesn't really matter if you can connect to it. And then the same thing with, what was this one? Fuck. I don't know. They're all dependent on, verification. Can you know that your signature is the one that matters? So
forgive the interruption. Sense, I just want to really stay focused on like the purpose, just until because it's so core. So, and if I hate interrupting people because then I don't hear.
No, it's fair. I tend to rant.
So there's a tragedy of the commons in decentralized technology. There's a tragedy of the commons in decentralized tech, in that there is no arbiter of what the purpose is. The social aspects are upstream from the protocol aspects, in that it only matters if people use it, and people only use it if they decide amongst themselves that a lot of people are going to use it amongst themselves. I don't disagree with like 90% of the stuff that you said. And so when somebody comes along and says, well, according to the white paper, according to the author, the purpose of this technology is digital cash made for transactions, I go with them on that for precisely as long as Nakamoto maintained control of the project, because it was his project, and he said what it was and what it wasn't, and he merged the commits, and he was the archon of the telos of Bitcoin. And once he handed it off, well, then it was that next person. And once that person handed it off to a team of people, then it was theirs. And they evolve the tech, or they don't. And if they evolve the tech in the wrong way, or don't evolve it in the way that the people socially using it want them to, then it stops being used and ceases being a thing. But there's a thing about the human species where the social dynamics of our faith in things that are important to us are very conservative. They don't change. They don't like to move because change is scary and, you know, who knows what might happen. And so when you apply that social dynamic to the tragedy of the commons that is crypto, you're left in a situation where we're stuck with the Windows 3.0 of cryptocurrency because everybody's too scared to iterate it in a way to fix problems that arise. One thing is actually using it as cash and having fast transaction times and low fees. Another one will be coming up very soon, I think. Quantum computing as an attack vector on the protocol, or at least on the wallet cryptography. We can talk about that later. It's kind of tangential, but there's going to be things that come up that present themselves as problems to the efficacy of the technology. And in any other tech where somebody is in control of it, and there isn't this tragedy of the commons, it's a non-issue. Like Monero in the crypto space would be an example. It's more tightly controlled by a group of people that decide what it does, and they iterate it constantly and quickly. They fix problems quickly. They innovate as needed to preserve their opinionated conception of mining for their currency. All other technologies like Windows and, I mean, name anything, any software. If it doesn't iterate, it dies. And the ones that iterate best are the ones managed by a small group of opinionated visionaries that really are dialed into what they want the tech to be, succeed and survive longer. And so I fear that the tragedy of the commons, this is a bunch of rambling just to make this point, that this tragedy of the commons stagnates the technology. We're stuck at version 1. Every tech I've ever seen that is stuck at version 1 doesn't survive too long. So that's, yeah, what do you think?
I would say, when was the last time TCP/IP was upgraded? And how many limitations does TCP/IP have? Like, we're essentially still on the, like, well, the more foundational
it's definitely
you go
been upgraded
in the protocol, not in a breaking way.
I
Never
I
in a
didn't
breaking
say
way.
it has to be a breaking way. It does have to be iterated, though. Like,
yeah,
the increasing. I don't think that's I think that's a disanalogy, because increasing block size wouldn't have broken anything. It would have just allowed more transaction throughput.
It's a fundamental fork. It makes everything that occurred prior to it incompatible. But that's why it was an altcoin.
Let me push back, because we're at some meat.
No
right?
longer.
So, go ahead.
Yeah. It's no longer in consensus with the protocol. So if they don't get everyone to upgrade, if all of the infrastructure doesn't shift to this new software immediately, which is a horrifically centralizing moment. Good example. Do you remember Bitcoin Dark at all?
No.
Okay. So it's important to understand that all of the elements of security are emergent. They take a while to actually create a Lindy effect and prove that you actually have that security, and it's a process of maturation. So the code itself is like DNA, whereas the thing in the real world is only secure because the DNA grew up into an organism that's strong. It's the difference between an infant in the womb versus a grown man who can cut down a tree, a lumberjack, right? And if I want someone to cut down a tree for me, you can't just copy the lumberjack's DNA and make an infant and then say, I'm a grown man capable of cutting down a tree. It actually has to mature to that point to be sustainable. Like, for instance, Bitcoin was horrifically centralized at the very beginning. If Satoshi said something for the first couple of weeks, he's the only one running it. He's the only one running a node. Like, I guess maybe he would have had to, agree with Hal when, Hal turned something on a couple of weeks later. But it had the DNA to be a decentralized, secure, stateless money, but it certainly didn't have the capacity to actually do that. So you only get these things in an emergent fashion slowly over time. And all of these things are constantly being hit. Network security is a huge issue sometimes, like the Great Firewall of China. Is Bitcoin still Bitcoin inside of China? If you have 50 megabyte blocks and you're talking about like gigabytes a day, you can cut Bitcoin off through China. If you have a very small, like tight network of throughput, you can maintain the monetary base by squeezing it through every crack in that firewall you can. You can broadcast it on a radio signal over the border. Again, we're talking about nuclear grade security. This is the foundation of an entire monetary stack. And when you look at and going back to the purpose, if you want to simplify the purpose, I think the purpose of a thing is its highest value use case, like the most valuable thing that you can get out of it. And what I think the most valuable thing Bitcoin can provide is a stateless monetary policy and system of property rights. It's, do you own this, or does the state get to decide whether or not it's yours? Now, the only reason any of that is true is because you are the one verifying anything. This goes back to one of the major disagreements as to whether or not full nodes are meaningful at all. Full nodes are essentially the only way to actually know that your transactions.
Sorry to interrupt. You are really good about covering like 10 things, and then I forget the first 5 things I wanted to talk about.
Sorry.
No. That's,
I told you I ran.
No. Just please forgive the interruptions. Please, give me grace in that regard. Changing the size limit on a block is not. I don't think it's fair to say that's like you're bootstrapping an entirely new technology. It's a software upgrade. And if the Bitcoin, I mean, we all do software upgrades constantly every day, every time a new version of something comes out. And if it's really a problem to get everybody to upgrade and sync, maybe it should have an auto update feature, and that should be also iterated and added. And there's no problem with making tweaks to improve the tech. And the language you used, I should have interrupted you earlier because I forgot the words you specifically used to describe changing the block size, but it was something that seemed like I wasn't just tweaking and you're not just tweaking a number on a limit of one of many facets of a protocol. You're fundamentally breaking and recreating something new, and you're invalidating all the previous blocks. I don't even think that's fair language, because it's not like you're erasing everybody's ledger. All those blocks are still valid to verify all the transactions of all the UTXOs that happened before the update. It just means that the new blocks that are added have a new limit in place that allows more transaction information to be added. I don't mean to be quibbling about language, but it does seem that the framing is important.
Language is a big part of the problem. I totally understand it. I would ask, is the network the piece of software, or is the network all of the people, all of the computers, all of the wallets, all of the individual owners? Because a fork is disconnecting from everybody else's software, and it's saying you have to download my piece of software right now, this one thing that now the entire network is going to be dependent on, this one version of this one thing that we all have to upgrade to immediately, that one group says we have to upgrade to, or all of it's unusable. Like, that's the nature of the fork of the protocol, not the fork of the project, not like just a fork of the software on GitHub, but a fork of the network itself. And that's specifically why it was an altcoin when they did that, because I didn't upgrade my node. I didn't download their software, so they weren't able to change my computer. Like a good example of the argument. Oh wait, no, illustration. Why is it that it is actually turning it back into an infant rather than just getting a new jacket for your lumberjack or whatever? If we want to use that analogy for the language, is Bitcoin Dark. Bitcoin Dark forked off right around that same time, and for a seemingly very, very good reason, right? Is that we're going to add privacy into the base layer, and they created 2 different transaction types. And one of them was the normal UTXO, so it was still valid with everybody else's. And then one was a private, like ring. I think was similar to Monero. I can't really remember. And they forked off during this whole time because there were a ton of Bitcoin forks all during this zone of time. And it ran for like a year. And everything seemed fine. Everything seemed great. Everybody was on this new protocol and this new system. And funny enough, it was actually a Bitcoiner who was running a full node for a ton of the Bitcoin forks just out of sheer curiosity of just like, how do these things work? What's going on the things? And he was actually the one who noticed the anomaly. And hardly anybody was running a node for Bitcoin Dark. So certainly not a full node. Everybody was doing SPV, which is considered the safe way to not be a miner. But he was running a full node, so he saw it. And more Bitcoin came out of the dark pool of funds than should have existed inside of the dark pool of funds. And if you weren't running a full node, remember the Bitcoin are only created in the actual set of rules. So if you don't actually know where your Bitcoin were created, like what block they trace all the way back to, then you have no idea if you actually own any Bitcoin, because the Bitcoin isn't even a thing. It's just an abstraction from the rules that you're running in the software. And what had happened is that during the hard fork is the easiest way to attack the entire network and completely change whether or any and all rules of the system, because you're no longer relying on the network to defend the rules. You're saying that this one piece of software is now king of everything, and everybody has to upgrade to it now. They had created 300,000 additional coins that didn't exist. Otherwise, like 21,300,000 into the dark pool, and they'd waited a year to pull those funds out. And because people weren't running full nodes, they hadn't noticed. And because of the fork, all of those assurances disappeared. That fork was their chance to get it in. If they had made a compatible client that for whatever feature or whatever that they were trying to add into the software, everybody who wouldn't have upgraded would have immediately rejected it, and then they would have forked the second they had money in the system, that visible in the system, that wasn't following the rules. So you lose all five. You lose everything about the security of the system the second you create a network fork. And it's not about like what we intend for it to be or what we want it to be. It's about what the protocol consensus is. Because everybody is running, you want as many people as possible running the software. The reason that you have centralized control in the Federal Reserve and all of this stuff is because everybody's just referring to them as to what the truth is. So imagine you got like a stadium full of people, right? You got 50,000 people in a stadium, and then here's a little king. Here's the Federal Reserve in the middle of the system. And he's just saying that this is the state. This is the state of the balances. This is what money means, or this is what math means. Now imagine you have all 50,000 people go to the extreme. Let's say everybody is running a full node. In the first instance, we have a centralized network. Everybody is just connecting directly to him, and he is the authority as to everything that's going on. He can change all of the rules. He can just arbitrarily say whatever the hell he wants, and because we're all accepting it, well then, it's his. This is his system. We are all his slaves. Now imagine we're all running full nodes. We are running, we check everything from top to bottom. We define on our own computer what the system is. And so if he says something, we just check on our own computer and we say, what the hell is that guy doing? We're just going to ignore him. My computer by default is just going to kick him off of my network. And now all 50,000 people don't have to give a flying F. I'm sorry, I've already cussed on this. I don't even know if that's okay. Nobody has to care what that guy in the center does or says. It's the same argument. Like the argument that full nodes don't matter is the same logic as guns don't matter because the state has jets and nuclear bombs. It's like, sure, with my one gun, I am not going to fight off the military. If a battleship comes to my house or something, I can't do anything with my one gun. But if you have a society where everybody has a gun and everybody is willing to defend their right, their private property, their liberty, well, then it doesn't matter how big and powerful that government is. Everybody can just kind of tell them to F off. A full node is that. I am defining for me, I am saying what Bitcoin is on my computer. And if anybody contradicts that in any way, They literally disconnect from my node, and I don't have to do anything. It's entirely default. And the monetary rules, the ownership rules, all of those things exist in that software. And it's not a voting system. It's not like, oh, if 10,000 nodes say this is the way it is, then that's the case. No, if I'm running my software, I can be the only one running it, but I'm still defining the money for me. What I'm betting on is the shelling point of the network is going to be that they don't want to get kicked off of the network. They want to participate and stay in consensus with everyone else. And the network is what gives it a decentralization. That is what the people, the computers, all of the robust exchanges, the liquidity, all of these things are what makes it hard to change and what makes it hard to fight against. The second you fundamentally fork the protocol, again, not the software. It seems like a simple change to the software, but you're forcing everything on the network to alter those rules. That's when you can have system-killing bugs. In fact, SegWit2x, the first fork that happened before Bitcoin Cash, fundamentally broke the whole thing. They were just trying to do that simple thing of just changing that one number, and they had an off-by-one bug, and they were never even able to produce a block. They launched, and then just the network just died. And even Bitcoin Cash fundamentally broke the difficulty adjustment. They were trying to create a system that was going to save it if it ended up with a minority of the hash rate, but they ended up allowing one of the most elegant pieces of the network to be gameable. It was the incentives were lopsided. And again, if it wasn't a hard fork, they wouldn't have been able to make that change. And so Bitcoin Cash was like a mess for like 3 weeks before they had to hard fork again, and everybody had to upgrade to the new client, which wasn't as hard because the old one was just kind of grinding to a halt. They had like 12, 18-hour blocks where nothing came in, and then they have like 2016 blocks in a matter of like an hour. It probably wasn't that extreme with like within an hour. Probably took a half a day or something like that. But there were literally seconds between blocks because of how they called it the EDA, the emergency difficulty adjustment. And essentially the incentive only worked one way. The adjustment only worked one way. And it became immediately gameable. And it got worse and worse as time went on because people realized, like, the miners were incentivized to just mine when it was profitable and then take the hash power away when it wasn't. And that caused just psychotic fluctuations in the difficulty adjustment. Rather than actually being a stable system. Again, only because of the hard fork. As soon as you hard fork the protocol, everything that you built up in the tens of thousands of computers that are defending the network, like this thing is a fortress of validation. That is what it is. You have to get 10,000 people to check your work and agree with you in order to do anything on the Bitcoin network. That is its strength. And the fact that nobody can agree on anything, the fact that Dan Held thinks it's supposed to be a store of value and Roger Ver thinks it's supposed to be peer-to-peer cash, that's actually a security element. That's a security element in the social sphere, that this thing's hard as a rock, and we're all going to scream and bitch and argue about all this stuff, but you can't change it. It's stuck. So if you want to solve a problem, you're going to have to do it within the protocol consensus. And that's its value, not its drawback. The limitation or the trade-off there
that value is the death knell of technology. Techs that don't iterate die. That is, if there's a universal rule of technology, that's it. You have to iterate, you have to improve. And look, I'm not saying you're wrong. And here's another thing. I'm not here with a side like some of the people participating in this conversation. I'm not here trying to convince people to change Bitcoin. I'm not trying to sit here and convince people to not change Bitcoin. I'm like back here on the outside pointing out problems that are intractable. There's hundreds of thousands of wallets that literally can't spend their Bitcoin right now because they have less than the network fee. It's hard to keep this conversation on path because there's so many digressions.
There's so many things.
I'm not sure to what degree I give a shit about China. Like, they have chosen to live under communism and they're happy with their firewall. Otherwise, they'd be resisting it. So Am I gonna
I only use it as an
enslave?
example of an adversarial
Am I going to enslave
Can
my
they-
freedom to what commies in China will allow? I don't really like that, but at the same time, I do want to free the world. So it's important to, if we can help, we do that. What else?
I mean that in the sense is, can it stand up to an adversarial government? Like, can you still get network access? Because your transaction ownership doesn't mean anything if you can't access the network. And a network that requires enormous amounts of bandwidth is easy to block. Here,
I don't know that any of the technology thus developed in cryptocurrency is resistant to government if the government truly becomes a threat actor. They have such capacity to introspect every single one of our internet connections in real time with AI. I forgot what they're called. There's AI firewalls, AI monitoring that they can switch on at the ISP level.
There's a fair point there.
So I think the whole tech is still vulnerable. But anyway, that's yet another of a million digressions. My criticism was that its purpose is an intractable problem. It's going to be whatever people say it's going to be, and the human species is not going to want to change Bitcoin, and they're not going to want to click the update software button that doesn't exist, by the way, which might be another part of the problem. They want Bitcoin to stay Bitcoin. Okay, so it's going to get out iterated, and other cryptocurrencies are going to come along that do what Bitcoin does better, faster, more securely, more privately. The band-aids, bolt-on techs like Lightning that, and I know I'm using opinionated language here, and it's not meant to be insulting or exacerbating. It's just,
it's fine.
I'm speaking honestly.
Listen, I'm not offended. I'm not offended about any. And I'll also go ahead and preface, actually, is that the purpose in my mind is stateless money. Like, if I thought Bitcoin was the opposite, was not providing that, I don't have any religious devotion to Bitcoin specifically. If I thought something was doing that better, I'd be happy to jump on it. The problem is the fact that if you do not have, like, I literally think we should be designing something that is state proof. I think Bitcoin is the closest thing. It's still got a mess of problems. It's still a disaster in a lot of ways. It's got a lot of mining centralization, both in the physical, which we've at least seen if it's attacked in like a full-on ban sense with China, that it does respond relatively quickly. And mining pool centralization is a problem, but it's at least at a higher layer. It's a network layer problem rather than a fundamental where is the actual hash power located problem. So it's a slightly easier one to solve, but it's still not an easy one to solve. It's got a lot of problems, and I'm not saying it's not. Lightning has a lot of drawbacks. The onboarding problem, the fact that you need an on-chain fee, is a pain in the dick. But at the exact same time, it's a 50 to 100x increase in the amount of payments that it can actually clear, and without actually fundamentally increasing the cost of verifying and proving the monetary security. So every other means of quote unquote updating that I have seen have all just traded off one of the other elements of security. And one of the big ones has always been, can you verify and know without a shadow of a doubt that your money is real in the system and it's not been created out of thin air, or it's not been created outside of the rules? Like, I think even the Ethereum archival nodes, like the first 100 blocks they just don't even exist anymore. You can't recover them. So you have no idea where the overwhelming majority of Ethereum were created and what the original ownership was. You just don't know what happened in that. And in that sense, you can only ever prove what you can still get access to. If you only have the full nodes with Amazon and Google and Visa, if it takes 30 terabytes, if they're the only ones that can run a node, well, then they're the ones who decide what the miners' rules are, what their restrictions are. They're the ones who decide because everybody's connecting through them. Now, that doesn't mean we have the same problem with transactional. We have the same problem if it costs more to move the UTXO, just like you said, than the fee on the network. Like, that's a pain in the ass. But we're looking at the difference between a broadcast and a unicast network. What Satoshi made was peer-to-peer digital cash that only scaled to a certain degree. As soon as it got to a certain point, the bigger, like in fact, that was like one of the very first responses. Like, I think the first thing that was said on the cryptography mailing list after he published it was, this is a great idea and it seems really interesting, but it doesn't scale. It's a broadcast network. So every single message that happens on the network has to go to every single participant. And the only reason it's secure is because everybody checks the work. If you don't check the work, you're just relying on someone else, and then they're relying on someone else, and they're listening to the guy in the middle of the stadium. As soon as, if you can get people to check the work, well, then the crowd, the network itself is the one that's defining whether or not it's real. Like whether or not it's actually Bitcoin, it's actually in the monetary policy. Sorry, you sound like you want to interject.
Yeah, it's to the point, like, if we only had a small group of large corporations that run full nodes, I think there's some exaggeration in there, but fine. Let me just give that to you, whole cloth. So what? If Amazon if Microsoft mismanages Windows, I'm going to switch to a different operating system. If the companies that are in charge of iterating their tech start making unhealthy decisions, I'm going to use different tech. It's the competition that brings the social and technological security. It's the fact that iOS exists gives Microsoft a reason to make sure Windows isn't full of bugs and exploits, because people will switch. This idea that we're afraid of a few small, large nodes ruining the tech. I mean, if we have competition and we have alternatives, then it's going to be in those companies' best interests to make sure that they don't. And we would have ways to verify that they're doing what they say they're doing by having independent audits. And everybody doesn't need to be their own independent auditor. I don't need to I don't need to be an expert in operating systems. I need to trust, not separation of concerns. It's an economic term. Separation of jobs.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Where everybody doesn't have to be an expert in specialization. Everybody doesn't have to be an expert in everything. In fact, that's impossible. And to attempt that is dumb. I want to find somebody that's really passionate and is a real expert in what they do to do it as best as they can. And then I want to give them $5 a month to do it for me. That's the economy of scale. I can't think of the economic word for it right now, but separation of concerns allows us to be way more successful.
I know what you're talking about.
If Microsoft starts fucking it up, like they certainly have over the past 5 to 10 years or since the beginning, like Windows 11, what a complete dumpster fire in terms of monitoring and all this stuff. If they start messing it up, I'm not going to say, well, it's time for me to develop my own operating system. No, I'm going to go find a different expert that's not screwing it up as much. And then I'm going to semicolon and point out a problem that I see with a lot of open source projects. Most open source projects are dog water. They're failures. They don't go anywhere. And then when you add decentralization to open source, it becomes a tragedy of the commons on top of a bag of a dog poo poo. And so few of open source decentralized projects are successful and well run. The open source projects that are really well run, like Linux, are run extremely hierarchical. Yes, anybody can submit, a change or a pull request, but you're probably going to get made fun of and called names by Linus. Because he is in charge, or somebody a small team of people he's delegated. There's a hierarchy, there's a vision, there's opinions, there's quick iteration made possible through that. The more decentralized a project is, the more stagnant it's going to be.
Holy God!
And the more stagnant it is, the more quickly it will become irrelevant. And that's my point. Like, if we care about Bitcoin as opposed to the alternatives, then we want it to iterate. We want to click that software update button as often as we need to keep the tech relevant. Right now, it's falling into irrelevancy in any of the categories that I subjectively care about. That's the important point that we were making when we were talking about the purpose of Bitcoin. We all have our own opinions about what it should be and what we want to use it for. It becomes irrelevant to me when my Bitcoin is locked in a wallet because the fees are too high and the confirmation time is 3 days long or something silly like that. And why these aren't problems, or why those aren't seen as larger problems than China being able to download the blocks quick enough. I don't know. I'm not like emotional or tribal about it. I'm just saying that tech has a problem. Luckily, I have alternatives. I'm going to go use those for my digital cash. I don't need... I think I've made my point like 17 times, so I'm repeating myself.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say there's no such thing as quickly changing your money. And I know you can quickly change an app, but the thing that makes money when it becomes the dominant, like underlying policy of society is liquidity. It's how many things can you trade for this good? The monetary good of society is the most saleable, like the economic term, right? It's the one with liquidity with every single other market. The reason you can cheat the dollar and it doesn't have any consequence, it doesn't matter, and nobody just says, "Oh, I'm just going to stop using the dollar. I'm going to go use something else," is because the network effect of money is stronger than anything else. It's worse than the lock-in on Facebook. It's worse than the lock-in on Amazon. The network effect of money and the consequence of liquidity is extraordinarily hard to overcome. The average span of time it takes for a monetary transition throughout history is a century. It's 100 years to undo it. So you can make money crappy for a really, really, really long time before you actually create enough pressure and you destroy it enough in order to actually force a change. Bitcoin, crypto, everything in the crypto space right now is incredibly nascent. 15 years is nothing in the terms of a monetary transition when you look at historical monetary moves and shifts. And the building out of liquidity is the most important and most difficult task. And it's the thing that just doesn't get undone, which means that if you don't have a robust way to enforce the policy is just going to arbitrarily change and everybody's still going to be stuck. You can't change trillions of dollars worth of liquidity in every single country on earth like that. That's why the dollar remains the dominant thing, even though they're printing trillions every single year. If they're the only ones running they're the only ones running the full node. We could all just change to a different money. I think the difference is, obviously we want transactional privacy. We want transactional freedom. We want to be able to use peer-to-peer cash. But the broadcast layer of this network stack, I think it's absolutely impossible to scale the protocol without a series of layers. There's just no way to pull this off as a broadcast network. You need a unicast network on top of it. If you had to filter through every single text message on your phone in order to get your text messages or emails, the thing just dies very, very quickly. It's just one person could overload the whole thing with spam.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that point. This is the world's least efficient database technology. It just has this one superpower of being government resistant. 100%. And I get that, and I think you might be right, and maybe L2s are needed, but it doesn't mean that they have to be built on this Windows 3.0 tech. I'm repeating myself. All right, so we spent an hour on the first topic. Let me try and progress it a little bit. Hopefully, let me know if you have let me know if you have a hard stop, and I'll keep an eye on the clock for us.
Nah, I'm just chilling.
Okay, so I can't believe we just did an hour on the first one, but I mean, that was the pretty much the most fundamental.
It's good stuff. You gotta hit the fundamentals. Everything else doesn't make sense if you don't.
Let's see. I'm going over my show notes for my chat with Roger Ver. He talked about the 2 failure modes. I don't think we probably have too many disagreements there. Good evidences of Bitcoin stagnating to the point where it's being abandoned would be things like Steam abandoning it, Microsoft abandoning it, these large companies dropping BTC adoption in favor of other techs. Now, again, like, it doesn't really bother me. I don't have an ego dog in this fight. I'm just kind of pointing out that if nobody's accepting it, the liquidity is definitely an important aspect, and the liquidity is harmed by the fees and confirmation times going up. Like, I have if I hadn't lost 3 of my wallets in a boating accident, I would have 3 wallets that are the only way I could trade them with somebody would be to hand the seed to somebody else so that they could maybe in the future use those funds because they just don't have enough in them. It's burned money to a degree. That's really bad. That makes people feel bad. Who's going to want to buy a wallet that if they put some cash in, depending on the day and time and how much demand there is, they might not be able to pull any of the money out of their wallet. Like, my mother is not going to come anywhere near that technology. General adoption is just not going to happen. As evidenced by Steam and Microsoft and these other companies that were accepting it for a while, no longer accepting it. What do you think about that? Like, it feels like this is just really obvious evidence that some poor decisions are being made by the community, the tragedy of the commons.
So what they stopped using was Bitcoin base layer transactions as retail payment. And that was always going to happen. The scaling problem is not something that just ends one day. Like, we don't hit a point where we have enough payments. As soon as you have the capacity to do more payments, it'll just get filled up. If there's any demand for the good or the service, it's what's Trayvon's paradox is if you open up the capacity for more demand, everybody will just fill it, right? Jevon's paradox.
Yeah, especially because especially because of things like allowing people to put JPEGs on the goddamn blockchain.
100%.
I'm really opinionated on this, but again, it falls to the exact same problem.
We can agree on that for the next 10 minutes.
It falls to the exact same problem. The tragedy of the commons, the lack of leadership that can say, "Look, guys, this technology is digital cash. Get your fucking JPEGs off of it." Like, that's DDoSing. Yeah. Stop it. But that person doesn't exist. So the purpose of the technology is whatever people can make it be, which is an attack vector that is not going to get repaired. I interrupted you to rant about JPEGs again, but go ahead.
No, totally get it. I'm 100% with you on that one. This shit drives me crazy. Filling up a whole block, scanning pictures of your ass, and just it's such an absurd thing. I can't even. But anyway, what was it? Oh, the scaling problem is infinite.
Is someone's ass on the blockchain?
You know, like 100%.
I love and hate that very deeply.
Yes, I feel you so much. But the scaling problem is infinite. Like, when somebody says, like, oh, well, this could be better. Like, as soon as we're entering the area of we're going to fork it, we're going to break the software, and we're going to open ourselves up to the introduction of a breaking bug that could potentially hold on a second. Follow my reasoning for just a second.
I'm holding. Believe me, I'm holding.
Okay. If you fundamentally split all of the network software so that everyone has to upgrade, you introduce the capacity for consensus bugs. You introduce the capacity for a complete changes to the monetary protocol, any and all. And as soon as we introduce, and it's a hugely centralizing force, because the defense is people aren't upgrading. People are still using the old rules. And if there is a bug, if there is a change to that consensus rule, those old nodes will still reject it. So the longer it takes to actually make any changes, the more secure that change is. Because it means there are people who are still checking and validating and ensuring that it doesn't alter the consensus as it has always been. And of course, it's not kicking people off. Like, if you fork and I don't upgrade, well, then my wallet is just inaccessible. I don't have any funds. I'm not connecting to anybody, and it's unusable. And now I have to go find somebody else's software and figure out, and it's a huge attack vector of, like, you know, phishing and God knows what else, because my software is no longer connected to the network. My network security is gone, and I have immediately introduce a trusted third party. The scaling problem. So when we talk about, like, 8 megabyte blocks versus the 2 megabytes or 4, however you want to measure it, that it is right now, is 8 megabytes. It's like, okay, sure, maybe we'll have low fees right now, but Ethereum has, like, what, 10 times the general capacity or more? because they have like 2-minute blocks, and sort of. Their systems was like a little bit different, but they had $100 fees, $150 fees during like all the crypto stuff. Back in 2013, there was a gambling game that basically put all of the transactions in the gambling network, basically broadcasted everything to the network, and they started filling up the entire network all by themselves. And if transactions are free, everybody's just going to broadcast, and then it builds business models that rely on transactions to be free. And then because you have a broadcast network that necessarily has to have a restriction on how much data can actually go through it, or you just have PayPal. You just have PayPal if you have a central authority determining what the rules are and what transactions are valid and not. And if you have if you have 8 megabyte blocks, 32 megabyte blocks, all of those are totally meaningless in the scope of the actual scaling problem. A lot of people are doing this thing where they're taking like how many retail payments do people make on Visa or the FedWire or whatever it is, how many transactions do we have? And then this is the capacity that we need. The second that capacity is open, this is programmable money. This is digital money. The problem will not be the size as it used to be. I think thinking that we're going to have retail payments that we have to get at 60,000 transactions per second because Visa does it. Visa is just one payment network. We're talking about a global monetary stack. If we're using that as our metric, I think that's going to be like counting the amount of snail mail that we do and then thinking that that's how much we have to scale email. Emails are going to be text messages, like all of the different digital messages that we do are going to be an order of magnitude easy, probably 3 or 4 orders of magnitude as the messages in the old system. We're talking about the first ever digital monetary stack that has a monetary policy that the protocol defines rather than an arbitrary centralized group of people. And as long as it does not fork that policy, as long as the network keeps that secure, we have a million different ways to actually build on top of it. We have a hell of a lot of restrictions. We have a hell of a lot of problems and a lot of issues with the fundamental part of the design that, again, secures that monetary base. But if we work within it, we can get the security of the money and build a series of protocol stacks on top of it. But I don't think, as much as I wish it was a simple matter of like changing apps, like I can change PayPal to, well, Venmo I think is owned by PayPal, to Cash App or whatever it is, if one of them does crappy with their software. I think money is a far lower part of society, and it is a far deeper protocol. And we're talking about like, if we don't have this fully decentralized as absolutely hardened as we possibly can in 20 years, and we end up resulting in just a handful of people or some simple federation or whatever, basically guiding and controlling, arbitrarily changing what the rules of Bitcoin are. Let's say we change the one guy in the stadium to like 50 people that we trust. It's just going to be government money again. And it doesn't matter what payment system we have on top of it or how strong the security, the cryptography of the transactions are. It's just government money again. I mean, you can argue the Federal
It's not
Reserve is
government
12.
money if there's competition. So if it's possible to compete with it and to have your own crypto, you can't call that government money because it's not enforced at the point of a gun. There's no monopoly there. You can compete with it. You can outcompete with it. Right?
Okay, so the government sets the rules. Okay, maybe this is a fundamental disagreement that I think the Bitcoin rules trump the state rules, because
hopefully,
if the government says I don't own my Bitcoin, hopefully that's the whole point, right? If the government says I don't own my Bitcoin, that's not true, right? Like my UTXO will still only move if I say it does. And
I have to make a nerdy point because of the channel that we're talking on. Cryptocurrency is not a valid form of property, but I understand when people talk about it, they use the terminology of ownership, but it's at best intellectual property, which is not actual property. You don't own Bitcoin. You have access to manipulate a network packet.
You control it. You control it.
Okay.
You control it, and money is money.
I just had to make that annoying point because of the channel that we're on.
that's
yeah,
like a
go ahead.
semantic thing, and I mean, in a sense, you're right, but I think in a meaningful sense, if you're in control of it, you own it. You know, like that's the point of ownership. Is this something that I can use for my purposes? You know, you can say I don't own a sandwich, but it's a question of whether or not you're going to eat the sandwich or I'm going to eat the sandwich, right?
Ownership is
but
the right to
regardless-
control something, not the ability to. Like a thief has control of your wallet when he steals it from you. That doesn't mean that he owns it.
Well, he controls it. The point of ownership is to this is semantic. I'll cede the fact that okay, this is about control, not ownership. But if you have an independent system of control that is not stateless, I think fundamentally you're creating a system that mimics ownership in the way that ownership is supposed to mean. You know, like what is ownership supposed to mean? It's supposed to mean that it's mine. Well, the protocol determines whether or not this Bitcoin is mine, and my ability to keep a secret is what protects that control, that ownership.
I'm going to invite you back, and maybe we can talk about that on a future show. So
okay.
sorry for
go down the
sorry for
runway.
doing that to us. That was my fault.
Whatever.
Let's. Do you remember what I want to go to the Lightning Network next, but I want to let you finish your point before I interrupted you.
Okay.
And if you can't, then it's my fault for screwing you up, and I apologize.
Basically, the broader point was that the scaling problem is infinite. We have to have layers, and there's zero functional way for the base layer broadcast network to not have high fees. And the way it's an open square, you know, the mempool, like the broadcast network of Bitcoin, it's not made in such a way that you can actually guarantee low cost, fast payments, because it's literally just people screaming out their transactions into this global network, and it's being distributed as fast as possible. It literally has like weather. Like you have days in which it's overcast and you have days in which it's sunny, because you have no idea what the behavior of the people on the network are, and you're specifically creating an open permissionless network so anybody can behave as they wish within the validation rules. So there is no way to guarantee it. The same way every big block network has always had congestion, and as soon as it is going to be popular for any reason, it's going to be congested. And there will be periods in which there will be high fees. The question is, does that mean that now we like centralize again and we just say it's like, okay, well, let's just fork it because now we have this period where fees are high again? And so every single time we come to this problem, are we always going to solve it by going back into the social sphere and arguing about consensus and now having an arbitrary change as to what it is? Like the fact that we have 1 megabyte, which we don't have 1 megabyte, but the fact that we have the block size the way it is, the only reason it's technically it's 4 megabytes in block weight, but it meaningfully means about 2 megabytes. So it was basically a doubling during the whole block size war, just because of the kind of trick of the software that was solving the malleability problem, solving the bug of being able to alter the signature and make it so you can't find the transaction hash properly. Just whatever the mechanism they did to solve that, they found out that they could actually get a quote unquote block size increase without actually breaking the consensus, like altering the protocol itself, that only the people who upgraded had to worry about it. And then you could upgrade slowly. That's why all of the changes of Bitcoin, even before then and since then, have just all been soft forks, which have been a ton of different changes, actually. They're just slow and difficult. It's essentially the scaling problem is something that will never end. No matter how big we made the blocks, at some point, that discussion's back on the table. So the question is, do we set the precedent that we are fundamentally forcing a change on the entire network, on top of the people, the infrastructure? It would be as if we needed to alter TCP/IP to make the internet. Like, how long has it taken to get version 6? Like, they've been trying to do that shit for 25 years or something on TCP/IP because we ran out of IP addresses. God knows how long ago.
Tragedy of the commons.
That's
just everywhere.
Yeah, that's the sort of problem that we are having. But that protocol is base level enough that we're still using it. And we're still trying to upgrade it. God, Jesus, I hope we don't get to a point in Bitcoin that it takes that long to actually put in the next thing. But the number of things that we can actually do within it, I think trying to rebootstrap a new monetary base and the fact that it's going to compete on monetary liquidity as a more important factor than any arbitrary like payment network characteristic or payment app benefit, something that we want. And as soon as you have a broadcast network, it doesn't matter. You can't guarantee low fees. Like at some point, you should like the difference between 20 megabytes and 2 megabytes is like we're standing at the edge of the ocean and I'm holding a glass and the other guy's holding a bucket and he's saying, see, I can hold more of it. And it's like, well, the problem is still the ocean. Like we can get a dump truck and it's still just not going to mean anything when we're talking about a global scale monetary system. So I think the best that we can do is figure out how to work within it, make every single UTXO. How do we make these things represent 1,000 transactions, 10,000 transactions a piece? How do we still want the holy grail of some sort of a two-way peg, and everything we find just has trade-offs. All of it just has trade-offs. There's no perfect solution. The block size, increasing the block size just increases the chance of, or the ease at which we can control the network. It makes it more difficult to stay in consensus, and it means there's going to be way less verifiers. Whereas we could get hopefully all 50,000. Obviously the best case scenario is 50,000 people in the stadium are all doing the math and checking themselves. But if we can only get 5,000, well, as soon as you increase the block size 10x, you can bring that down to 1,000. You can keep knocking it down. Everybody's going to go to SPV, and the longer it goes on, the more and more centralized it's going to get over time.
Yeah. So the tech is useless to a certain percentage of the population right now because of how it is currently designed. And so the question is, do we make changes to it to make the tech useful? When it becomes useless, yeah. Where's the threshold for making that change? That is a continuum problem. That is an open question. You're right. I agree. This whole thing though seems like a non-issue. Like it's irrelevant. This whole debate about where that line is irrelevant as long as JPEGs are allowed to fill up any empty space in the blocks. Why haven't they fixed that? Or is that not seen as a problem by the consensus? Like, as long as they can spam the blocks, then what are we even doing here? Like, why are we even talking about block size? They are just going to fill up as much as they can, right?
I think the best defense of the JPEGers, I guess you want to call them, is simply fees. There's really not, no matter what you do, you can try your damnedest to balance the incentives of arbitrary data versus transaction data. But unfortunately, there's no real way to stop anyone from putting arbitrary data. There's just too many opportunities to make that happen. And you need a big signature space. So all you can really do, which I think should be done, is increase the overall cost of that type of data. But defining it is really difficult. So essentially it would be to alter the block weight thing where signatures are discounted, because signatures is where they essentially hid this information. And because of that is it's essentially lower cost data because it's not actually in the transaction part of the thing. It's in the signature data. So I think you could, you have to get, use of filters, but it's in social consensus. It's not a fork, like it's all kind of within the protocol as it is. So you really just kind of need consensus on people to slowly but surely change to that. And I really wish, I mean, if you have heard of somebody who came up with a really good way to filter this, I think they're all kind of half solutions. And if the kind of solidity of the network is to get people to sell bullshit, they're going to figure out how to squeeze shit into the chain. It's like a public park. You know, you can't like fully police people taking a dump in the park. You just kind of have to deal with the fact that, you know, you're gonna have to go around and pick up some dog shit and some feces, human feces from time to time, and do with what you can in that. But it doesn't ruin the park. It just means that we have to be better stewards of it. But again, any other network that ends up being valued for that, I mean, the theory, I mean, I guess actually maybe one of the big things would be, again, it's all about layer twos. It's all about like trying to figure out a new way to exchange the ownership. I think the best way to actually scale Bitcoin that makes it meaningful and makes it actually stop, because the problem is the money printing. The payments problem is a problem. Peer-to-peer cash is a problem. But what Satoshi invented, the network that he invented, he had to solve two extremely fundamental problems that nobody had solved before in order to create what was peer-to-peer cash. And they were a monetary problem and a consensus problem. Is how do you create a set of rules in a digital network that essentially cannot be altered, that are secure? And he even said that very early on, that kind of the design of this thing is such that as soon as the thing is live, nobody really controls it anymore. The way it works is kind of set in stone. So if we don't get it right the first time, it's going to be such a unbelievable pain in the ass to alter that we don't really have the opportunity. But that's why what he had was peer-to-peer cash for a small network. But as soon as it grew to any size, it's going to have high fees, it's going to clog, and it's going to have spam and DDoS problems. I mean, that's why he put in the 1 megabyte limit. Like, it was originally, I can't remember what the original limit was, but there was like literally a spam attack in 2010 or something, just from the people using it, which I don't even think it was worth anything at the time. And that's when he implemented the limit, specifically because you're like, well, this isn't going to work if we're just being drowned in all the data. And you know, arguably that's what happens. That's what's happening with JPEGs and the poopers in the park. But again, if you have a solution to that, I would love to hear it. I think the best we can do is kind of do a network level filter. But that's like hugely contentious, and everybody's like bitching about it. And it's almost impossible to come to consensus on this. So I don't know. The thing is that I would love for fees to be low. Always. I would love for cheap and instant payments to occur. I would love to have full on privacy, but I do not think big blocks are the solution to that. I think they're kicking the can down the road at the cost of the verification and the monetary security. And I think if you do not have these two things, the other things don't matter. The other things are not actually secure. You're diluting the sovereignty of holding your UTXO rather than spreading it out to as many people as possible. It's a tank. And we were never going to drive a tank to go get groceries. It makes sense to have multiple layers for shallower payment networks. I mean, even Hal said from the very beginning, and his example of what it would be was really disappointing, is that he said it makes sense to have Bitcoin banks and have custodians, and that you have payment networks on top of it. But we don't want centralized payment networks. We want decentralized payment networks. We want to be able to own it ourselves. We want unilateral exit capability. That's a hard problem to solve, but it's not as hard as the money problem. The money problem is insanely difficult. That's a 0 to 1 invention that wasn't even considered possible in the digital space to solve the Byzantine generals problem. And we did that. And we should not trade that for an application layer problem. I think we can design. We have state chains. We have the Lightning Network, which is not the retail thing that it was sold. It's very difficult from every single user perspective, but it's going to be a 30-year problem. Like, I think one of the things that I've had to admit to myself, which is not fun to admit, is that it's going to be a really long time before we solve this problem. In the same way that the internet was a future, a decentralized future, it was a hope for a decentralized communication network. But we went to Web 2, and Web 2 is like grossly centralized. We kind of lost a lot of that. But I think Bitcoin is proving that if the slow route, it was Bitcoin being invented that we needed to fix the internet. but it was just not going to be an easy process. We need all of the layers working in tandem. And I see Bitcoin as a fundamental monetary court. It's a court system that can't be corrupted, you can't bribe a judge, and from anywhere in the world you can access it. And you can go to court, and in 10 minutes you can prove that you are the absolute owner of every of whatever it is that you own within that system. And it's fully incorruptible and fully stateless. And we want it to be stateless. Everywhere that it starts to get centralized or starts to open up a vulnerability, well, as an anti-fragile community, that's where we need to build. That's where we need to innovate. And in that court system, it's like, you know, like the reason you can go buy a donut and it's safe and you're not worried about somebody scamming you or they're just going to take your payment and then not give you a donut isn't because it costs a cent to go to court and prove that. It's because if you have any semblance of strong ownership in society, of individual control and sovereignty over capital, then everything below that layer ends up us kind of working through social consensus because of the capacity to punish somebody for doing something wrong. But I don't see any invention that has enabled us to have infinite payments to any degree that we want for free without cost that give the security that Bitcoin gives. And I still see plenty of problems with Bitcoin security. I see plenty of trade-offs at all stages and in all the different things, but it has gotten better every single year. Every time I've used it, it's easier to use. It's just a slow and aggressively painful process to get there. And we're working on top of a protocol that needs consensus from everybody. And just like the vicious fights in the history of Linux and every other protocol, it's hard to change. But I still think the monetary assurances and the liquidity in the network of Bitcoin absolutely, far and away, is the best and most secure. And that's the one that we should be building on and solving problems for.
What do you think of, what's your position on Lightning? Is it a bolt-on piece of garbage, or is it amazing? I haven't seen too many opinions in the middle.
Fascinating. It's a very, very fascinating system. Lightning has plenty of problems. Like, don't get me wrong. And it requires like the way to get like the ease of use or whatever. It's an always online thing, right? It's kind of like server versus client in the internet, right? Like there's a problem that you can't just host a website in your home. If you could, the internet would be way, way more decentralized. You kind of have that same dynamic. Lightning is a unicast network on top of Bitcoin. I think it's far more likely to be a connective tissue between all of the things that actually are retail facing, because it's much more like a server. Like not everybody runs their own server, but everybody does have their own router in their house. They necessarily have to. And that's kind of how they do their connection. They solve the limitation of IPv4, right? Is you create a LAN network. That's how I think about the layer twos, in a sense, is you're trying to create a LAN network within something. Like state chains is a really good example. I've been really excited to finally see that actually come to fruition. I think the launch for Mercury Layer is what it's called, is like next month. BitVM is also a very, very interesting thing because it allows agnostic programming inside of a UTXO. But so there's a ton of different ways. I mean, you could essentially build anything into it, especially if you have the capacity to put a whole freaking JPEG into a transaction, is that you can put a pretty big quote unquote program in the ownership of a Bitcoin script. And with I'm not sure if you know anything about BitVM, but it's a really, really interesting trick to essentially mimic hardware limitations, like hardware processing inside of a script with just kind of like arbitrary op-if stuff. It's a whole rabbit hole. But I think it's going to enable tons of different building for like zero knowledge proofs and stuff, and being able to be on a side chain where everyone actually has the capacity to exit to the main chain unilaterally by updating entirely off chain what's happening within this script, by essentially executing a little piece of software that is the proof of ownership. So you do introduce this limitation of like, well, if the software isn't secure, well, then neither is your ownership, but it exports it to a different layer. So you're not relying on fundamentally changing the base layer protocol and threatening the money and all of the other critical security elements of Bitcoin itself. You're able to build on top of it. And I think there's just a whole bunch of different trade-offs and a whole bunch of different ways to do that. And none of them are perfect, but all of them work better in some form or fashion. Lightning is a great server-to-server sort of system, but increasingly, I don't think it makes sense for most people to run their own node for the same reason people don't run their own websites. It's less likely to be that, but it is a global liquidity payment network. Like it grows, I think last year it grew 1,200% in the volume of payments. Like people zap like crazy on Nostr, and I have a non-custodial wallet. It's not like the end of the world, or it's not like psychotically difficult to actually manage. And with LSPs, you know what LSP is?
No.
Okay, LSP is referred to as a Lightning service provider. It's like you can think about it like
this is the hub spoke model. So you have like a hub that has a bunch of open channels.
Yes, and they essentially open the channel, and you always have enforceable. So it's non-custodial, but you require being online once every week or whatever to enforce your ownership. But you still have keys. It's just entirely off-chain with all of the updates, and it allows a non-custodial service provider. It allows financial services without taking ownership or custody of the funds. And because Bitcoin is an open permissionless network, it can be anywhere in the world and with anyone that you like. So I can provide this service to my first cousin, or I could choose the biggest provider in China or whatever. Essentially, borders don't matter in the context because you can always access Bitcoin, again, because the base layer cannot be throttled, choked out, or whatever. It's lean enough to make it through every crack in the networks of the world, so to speak.
In light of the recent Samourai wallet abducting and caging for money laundering, wouldn't these LSPs be an untenable business model? Because it seems like it'd be very straightforward for the government to just be like, oh, look at all these money lenders. Look at all these, what is the word?
Money transmitters. No,
money
100%.
transmitters.
They're going to try to attack it like that without a question. Which is another reason why it's so critical that the base network stay open and accessible, because I can still open a channel with anybody in the world, even if a US provider gets kicked out or choked or gets $5 wrenched taxed. And I think that's necessarily going to be the case with, as soon as you have a third party that's relied on uptime, you introduce that trade-off. The problem is, the question is always, do we have individual trade-off or do we have collective trade-off? In my mind, we either trade off the fundamental security and reliance of the robustness of the base layer, or we do it at layer of. For LSP specifically, yes, that's a limitation of Lightning, without a doubt. And in fact, we're probably going to see it very, very soon. I think with the Samourai stuff happening, I'm kind of changing what I'm doing, because my mobile wallet, like onboarding, I've onboarded a lot of people onto Lightning, and I'm not sure. I think you said in your talk with Roger Ver, you had a couple of years ago or something, you had an experience. I'll be perfectly honest, like your experience, it was not totally uncommon at the time.
Really? Okay.
The first couple of years, it was nightmarish. Like, and the software, there was a lot of incompatibility issues. Like it was a mess. The thing was alpha for 2 years, easy, and then it's beta. It's probably still beta if you really want to get down to nit and gritty. But a lot of wallets have shockingly simplified the process. Mutiny Wallet is one I've been using more recently, and that one is really good. I've been loving that. But the LSP model is far and away the best model for dealing with liquidity, and ease of use, because you just open it and you receive a transaction. Your first one is going to have a bigger fee, and it just has like a little thing that says, why is my fee? And it's like, well, we had to open up a channel. And then everything after that, when you're on Lightning, unless you receive an enormous amount that is no longer in your channel limit, but that's how you know it's proof of reserves. Like, that's a fundamental part of the security element of Lightning. So and because it's two parties, until we have a batched party, until we have an easy way to essentially create that security model with 50 people, with 100 people, and you can split that fee and kind of obscure that away, we're going to have a really bad, we have to order of magnitude it. So Lightning, like I said, in my personal experience, like I use Lightning all the time. I use it daily. I probably send like 10 or 20 zaps to people on Nostr, 1,000 sats a pop or something, just for fun. I buy gift cards with Lightning all the time. Use it at a number of different Bitcoin specific, like I'd like to buy from Bitcoin services, because I'm on a Bitcoin standard. So I know what it's like to deal with the on-chain fees, because 90% of what I do is in Bitcoin. And I have to know how to use all of the tech. And the LSP model has shockingly simplified that. It's really easy to use, but it does have that limitation. It's going to get attacked. So it's not a perfect solution by any means. It's a good stair step along the way. Again, the scaling problem is not going to be done. Like, people talk about, like, Lightning doesn't scale. It's like, well, sure, Lightning doesn't end the problem. Lightning is just adding a zero. It's probably, for me, in the context of payments, 50 to 100x. I do payments on Lightning all the time that would never work on chain. I probably do one a month on chain, maybe two, probably on average. But everything other than that is Lightning. But you have to get on Lightning first for that experience to be as easy and robust as it is with me. And then you have to pay fees again when you want to make a significant change. And I'm doing that right now just because all the holy money transmitter shit. I've kind of let that go for a little bit. And I am intending to actually change the channels. But again, you can have the broadcast layer is completely open and permissionless. You're going to have sunny days and you're going to have horrible hurricanes. And right now is a sunny day. So it's a good time to do that. But the base layer is always a bidding system. You're never, ever going to solve the scaling problem by just opening up to more bids, because more people are just going to bid. It's an auction. So fundamentally, an auction is not a good way to do a payment network. An auction is a great way to settle enormous amounts of value, especially if that auction is giving you some sort of consecutive, no, that's not the word, cumulative security on that network, because you're having proof of assurance, a proof of settlement, essentially, with the proof of work with the miners, and then you can verify that the miners can't cheat the rules, because the nodes themselves define the rules. That's why you need miners, because that's why the miners hash. Otherwise, if you didn't need the rules are what determine that a hash is the only way to make a valid block, right? So the verifiers not accepting the blocks, the liquidity of the network refusing to accept one without the proper proof of work, is the only reason we need proof of work. And what
do you think about
bidding network? Yeah.
Oh,
I was just saying that bidding network is never going to work fully in the way that you would want and expect for an application of payments. It's always going to have that problem, and it's always going to run up against whatever the limit is, and it must have some sort of a limit. So the application layer, the layers on top, will be the ones that solve that problem. And I think the big thing that hasn't been solved yet and needs to be solved, covenants kind of solve it. There's some really interesting models there. BitVM has a really strong potential. I'm still kind of on board with drive chains. It's not a wonderful solution, but it at least kind of exports the huge block problem to the side chain specifically. I would not be totally against drive chains. I've kind of gone back and forth. Lightning is a great sort of server to server sort of solution. And it's constantly growing and has a lot of adoption, but it still has a retail facing problem. What's the user doing? How do we onboard 100 million users? And I think until we kind of have a really robust and easy way to split one UTXO into the ownership of 100 people where everybody still has unilateral exit, that's really kind of the secret sauce of allowing security, privacy, payments that are cheap and reliable, and everybody can still go to the global unstoppable court and force it, even if their government says otherwise.
What do you think about?
It's not going to be easy.
What do you think about the death of zero confirmation? I want to make sure we kind of spend a little bit of time on each of the points that we went over with Roger. And one of the big ones was they appeared to kill zero conf on purpose, kind of relegating Bitcoin out of any kind of coffee sales.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on that one. I don't think it was a necessary decision. It was a little bit stupid, in my opinion. But again, it wasn't like it's totally by network rules. Like it's the client software. So the mempool doesn't even really exist. So any mempool rules that come up are kind of totally arbitrary. Because the mempool is something that we just kind of created to be like, all right, well, let's hold all of these things because we're going to have a backlog at some point. And RBF was kind of a formalized replacement of something that was already possible. If you follow miner incentives, they're just going to pick the biggest fee transactions, right? Like if I send a transaction to you with a 2 sat fee or something, and then I send a transaction back to me with a $2 fee, if you don't have, there's no way to prove or be 100% certain that all of the miners are going to be on board with the same policy, because again, it's arbitrary. You can change your client policy on that, and you're not forking. It's not a consensus rule. You can do whatever you want, basically. I could just call up a miner and send them an email with my transaction in it and get them to confirm it I don't even have to use the network. It's kind of arbitrary, right? They can just stick whatever the hell they want in their block. So RBF was assuming that because having a transaction stuck it's prioritizing trying to fix a transaction that's stuck because there is too much mempool policy of accepting zero conf, of not replacing it, so that you can just bump it later. And specifically, the reason why it needed to have the ability to alter the inputs or the outputs is because you want to do like a child pays for parent, or you want to be able to kind of get the benefit of lowering the fee by adding another transaction in to actually push it along. Essentially, a zero conf transaction isn't really secure. You're just trusting that all of the arbitrary decisions of the miners and all of the other nodes on the network are going to honor that policy, but it's literally an honor system. And so it becomes, and when there's going to be, like I said, there's always going to be weather on the blockchain, right? There's always going to be a time where 1 billion people are bidding all at once, and fees are going to be the thing that drive it up. And if you have high fees for 3 days for JPEGs, or just a lot of activity, or settling a bunch of stuff for some reason, God knows what, if you have a high priority transaction, you're going to want to rebroadcast that with a higher fee. Zero conf, like I said, RBF is a mixed bag, because you could have still done that. You could have almost provided that as like a wallet service. You could have, like I said, you could just email a miner to replace it. You could technically do that, but so I didn't think that problem needed to be solved at the network layer, because I think you could just do that in the application layer. You could do that entirely out of band, and there's no reason not to. So I kind of am, in a sense, against RBF, because we could have already done RBF. But in that same sense, I think zero conf was largely meaningless. Like, it wasn't secure, and it wasn't really a thing, because you could have out of band just done RBF anyway. So I'm also not like totally against it, because I don't think it mattered a whole lot. Like I said, it wasn't a consensus rule. It's just kind of an honor system. But no, I really kind of wish, overall, I wish it hadn't been put in the client. I think zero conf was a better default policy, and we could have solved that problem a different way, because you can always replace transactions if you really want to.
What do most wallets use as the default? Because, and explain this to me, because I'm not familiar with the technology behind the scenes. So when you the sender of a transaction can flag it as able to be RBF'd, or
yes,
or is it vice versa? Which is the default? Or is it based on
RBF is the flag.
Okay.
RBF is the flag. I mean, some of them might automatically add the flag, but like, if I'm doing like a payment, like if I'm buying like my ticket to the conference or something, like I did a BitBlockBoom, I don't do RBF because they make you wait for confirmations. And if I do RBF, and if I don't cut it on, they usually just go ahead and send the email after it's pending. But it's largely kind of like an arbitrary choice. I've used RBF a number of times, just because I really wanted something to get through and I just didn't want to sit around and wait. And I published it when fees were super low, and then somebody decided to mint a bunch of runes, and and then fees went up to $10 or some shit. And so I would send another transaction to open a Lightning channel or something at the same time and push it on RBF, or use RBF to make that change. Like I think Green Wallet does that one really well.
What do you think about?
Yeah, it's really just kind of a client side problem, in my opinion.
What do you think about Ver's sort of insinuation that it was done by Dylan to purposefully sabotage the technology? And I don't think I'm being disingenuous or taking Roger's book out of context by saying it like that.
I think that's what he says. Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a matter of, like, I think he thinks that fundamentally changed something. And like I said, you could have just done that at the application layer. So I don't think it really makes a difference in the implementation, because it really stems from the whole block size debate. It stems on what you think the base layer is for and what it's optimized to produce, which I think it's about consensus and security on a monetary base that can't be altered. And, like I said, a fortress of validation, and payments and the application layer are going to be layers on top of it. And if you think that, then RBF is just kind of arbitrary. And it's not going to fundamentally hurt or really help a lot outside of like certain very temporary conditions, which again is what it's built for. You can put the flag or not. So I think if you think of Bitcoin in the way that I do, as the highest value and reason for the base layer being the way it is, then RBF kind of makes sense. Whether you want to put it in the application layer or you want to put it in the reference client, so to speak. And if you think that Bitcoin is supposed to be able to guarantee low-cost payments, instant payments to anywhere at all times, and that's supposed to happen on the base layer, and there should never be a time in which that's not the case, well, yeah, RBF seems like an attack. But again, you could have done that without RBF. So I don't think it's a strong argument when it comes to like what the actual change was. I think it's really kind of just based on like what you think people's intentions were going into it.
What do you think about the accusation that BlockStream promoted small blocks for the purpose of selling their liquid network as the solution to the problem they created?
I would say it's funny, that accusation was about the Lightning Network for a long time, until it was pretty obvious that they weren't going to control, or they didn't have any specific power over the Lightning Network. And then they created Liquid as another alternative, which is open source. Like anybody can create a Liquid federation. And not even anybody really uses Liquid to speak of. Like it's not a super popular platform. And I don't think they really mean it to be for like retail payments. They're kind of making it more of a institutional layer thing, kind of like a I think they want it to be more like a stock exchange almost for business to business stuff, and that's why they put in confidential payments, is you have the ability to make, large agreements between businesses. If Apple's sending a transaction to Corning for $1 billion, that's a very important piece of information. That's something that all the competitors are going to want to take advantage of, and they're going to be like, oh, they're doing something with Corning. Okay, what kind of glass are they using? Blah blah blah. You need privacy in business transactions. I really think that's what they are targeting. Like I said, it's not hugely successful, and I think that if they wanted to dominate the market and keep blocks small, they could have just been a custodian. Everybody was already using custodians. That's like one of the big things. Everybody says like it's going to make everybody use a custodian. Everybody basically did for a long time. Custodians have been the dominant, for better or for like, as much as I hate it. And I try to explain it to people that you don't want to do this. The normies come in and they just use Coinbase. Like an example with both Liquid. Like I think Liquid is actually a decent attempt to make a sidechain without having the holy grail of a two-way peg. They've at least distributed it the jurisdictions across jurisdictions. They've at least added a bunch of different functionaries that have to agree, like it's a multi-sig, right? They have an open piece of software that you can verify so that you know whether or not the software tokens are related to the balance that you put into the network. It's a decent set of trade-offs. It's kind of like but it's basically a distributed custodian, and whatever the benefits of a distributed custodian are, which we don't really know because that's not even possible in the fiat system. You can't use 3 banks at once, but I think what they were trying to do in their mission was to create the holy grail of sidechains, and they just couldn't really solve the problem. And Liquid was kind of the best of what they could figure out that was actually implementable at the time. But it's not like they succeeded at their domination. Like their plan didn't work. And again, people are still just using custodians like they always were, or building on top of Lightning and working on 100 other different alternative solutions to it, because everybody's still looking for the solution. Everybody's still trying to figure out how to make this thing work for 8 billion people and 100 million AI agents that are going to be making payments and doing streaming payments back and forth. Like how do we expand this? How do we keep that tank level security and actually make it accessible to everybody? And I just think we're early, I think we're getting way ahead of ourselves. For as much as I wish we were there and we had the solution, I haven't seen it yet. I'm fingers crossed we make it work for 8 billion people and more. And I think we will get there. I just think it's going to be a long, hard road.
Another claim in Ver's book, link in the description for anybody that hasn't read it, is that the block size civil war was lost in a surprisingly large part due to pervasive censorship by a couple people, Thamos and I can never remember the other guy's pseudonym, Cobra maybe, but I think
Cobra BTC, I think. Yeah, it was Thamos. It was Thamos on the Reddit forum is what he's talking about.
Yeah, Bitcoin.org, Bitcoin Talk, the Bitcoin Reddit, and the Bitcoin Wiki. Yeah, what do you think about that?
I think hey guys, hey buddy. The problem with that is
we have to see a dog. It's the rule of the show. If there's a dog in the room, we got to see it.
Oh, hey buddy. Hey,
oh,
dude.
goodness.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That's a little Papillon Chihuahua. All right.
Cute.
Have fun. The censorship. Yeah, so this had gone on, I think, in the long timeline. Like, so I was there the entire time. And that's one of the other things too, is that I was a big blocker, quote unquote. Like, I was like all for the fork. I think the arguments for it are incredibly intuitive. Like, it's the default for understanding, like, okay, yeah, this thing needs to be increased. We need more capacity. And there was this long, like awful battle because there was no consensus on what we were going to change it to. Now it's like, well, use my client. No, use my client. No, we're going to make it 2 megabytes and we're going to call it classic. No, we're going to make it 100 megabytes. We're going to call it Bitcoin XT. We're going to do Bitcoin Unlimited, and we're going to increase it by 17% every year. And we just had a million different proposals and no shelling point to actually adhere to. The only consensus we had, again, was on the thing that we were trying to change or quote unquote fix. The quote unquote censorship on Reddit, I think it was a really bad idea, simply because it allowed that narrative to be spread that the censorship was why it went one way, but it had nothing to do with that. The censorship did not limit. Nobody was unaware. Like, we had been doing this shit for like 4 years nonstop. People were just fucking sick of it. Everybody was sick of it. Everybody was at everybody's throats. Every time we had one of these like Satoshi roundtables, or we had the meetings with the New York Agreement and all this stuff, people were literally screaming at each other and calling each other vicious and attackers. And you're the one that's trying to kill Bitcoin, and you're stupid. You don't even know how this shit works. Like, it was awful, and everybody was exhausted. And I think Thamos was just sick of this shit, and he was a moderator, and moderators on Reddit are tyrants. They're just going to implement whatever rules they want. And so he said, if this is a fork of the network, we're just not going to have this conversation anymore. But I think that was actually one of their biggest downfalls on the big block side, is that they focused so much on that they actually kind of let any advantage they have go away, because it turned into Thamos is stopping us from actually getting this to work. Nobody was unaware that there was a block size debate or what the sides were. You could not get away from it. Even with the censoring the mods on Reddit, you still couldn't. It was still the only thing anybody was fucking talking about. And everybody just wanted everybody to shut up and for something to happen. And when SegWit happened, this was the interesting thing. In the book, The Block Size War by Jonathan Beer, you should check that out. It's a great kind of, and it's not even like the small blockers are right. That's one of the things I love about the book, is I think they give a really fair shake to both sides. They really just kind of detail out everything that happened. And one of the things that you notice in the book is that one of the big reasons why the quote unquote small blockers won is because the default was on the consensus, was on the protocol consensus, was whatever they wanted to do was going to require a fork. And the campaign was really against SegWit at the time, which was the upgrade that was a pseudo block size increase. Like I said, it went from 1 megabytes to kind of 2 megabytes in an effort to fix the malleability. But then they found out, we can do a block size thing too. So this will be the compromise. But the quote unquote big blockers desperately wanted a hard fork, because I think that just meant in their mind that we can just keep doing this. Like, we're just always going to have a solution to the scaling problem. And obviously 2 megabytes wasn't going to solve it for good. And so if they didn't kind of fork the developer community, it really became like, we're firing the developers. And that was like a very common thing. I think it was like, fuck your mother if you want fuck. What's his name?
What?
Oh God, the Bitmain guy. You don't know this? Oh no. My God. It's a hilarious thing of like how awful and ridiculous some of the fights got. But it became like a common trope or a common phrase on the other side that they're firing the developers. So what they wanted to do was to get their reference client as the dominant one, which makes sense from their perspective. Like, that's what you would want to do. Yeah, I think XT is the one. But here's the funny thing, is that if you understood the kind of dynamics of the shelling point of the network, and because one of the things that there was like a lot of FUD about SegWit, saying that SegWit's removing the signatures and like now you're not going to own it and they're going to be able to change it and all this stuff. And it wasn't. I mean, obviously we know that now. And I think largely, funny enough, it was actually Litecoin, I think, that really kind of put that nail in the coffin on that argument. But I think they positioned it during that entire span as we're going to stop SegWit when they didn't really care about SegWit. We actually had largely consensus. Everybody was fine with SegWit. But because that's what small blockers were pushing for, it was just like my tribe, your tribe. I hate you for this. I hate you for this. Oh, you want SegWit? Screw your SegWit. I hate your SegWit. Oh, you want you want XT? Like it was, like I said, it was just vicious and an absolute mess. The idea that there was like good guys who didn't have bots or didn't DDoS or wasn't using like backdoor. Like you ever hear about ant bleed?
No.
The vulnerability in the Bitmain miners. Yeah. So
but
he was.
Go ahead and give us a brief version for people that haven't.
Okay, so the guy who ran Bitmain, I cannot remember his name right now, but it's the same guy who did F your mother if you want F, is he would kind of casually say, like in this like kind of like puffed up thing when like our debates would get really, really bad, that like, well, I can make it happen. Like I can actually make the miners like do this. So it doesn't matter. Like kind of like I'm going to throw my weight around, and everybody just kind of like dismissed it as, okay, well, he has a lot of miners, right? Like, so maybe he can say, I'm not going to sell you the new ASIC or something like that. But there was heavy centralization in the market then, which less centralization in the market, a lot of centralization in the pools and stuff right now. So that contest was going on, and it was like super vicious. And then someone, who was it? Was it Maxwell that found it? I don't know, but they found ant bleed. They found a vulnerability that there was actually a remote access feature in all of those miners that he said the defense, as soon as first they denied it when it came out, they said, no, he's just making stuff up. It's all a lie. And then a number of other people verified it as well. But basically Bitmain retained control over that remote access from their headquarters, which means that they could have cut off all of the miners on whichever fork that they wanted remotely, and people would have been scrambling to try to figure out what to do. And he was clearly throwing that weight around. But it's just one of the many, many examples of everybody was being a dick. Everybody was done being nice, and that's why there was an impasse. We knew there was going to be a fork. I literally I was so happy that Bitcoin Cash forked off, and I don't mean it like, oh, they lost. Like, quite the contrary. I was really excited to see these things next to each other and see if one of these theories actually played out properly. Like, okay, what is the highest value thing? Like, I did like a post on Reddit or Twitter. Were we on Twitter at the time? I think we kind of switched over to Twitter, congratulating. I was like, okay, well, let's put it in the damn market. Let's see what actually plays out from this. But then they had the emergency difficulty adjustment and like a whole pretty big problems right out the gate, which you can argue bad development or poor systems thinking, whatever you want to do. It doesn't really matter, but they didn't get off to a good start. But yeah, Thamos censored the Reddit conversation shortly. I don't even remember exactly when it started, but it was when everything was just as vicious as it could possibly get. But that is not why the outcome. I don't think it had anything to do with the outcome. Nobody was confused.
Let me push back on
the
that.
arguments were.
So, like
Yeah,
in my chat with Roger, I said that sort of my conclusion, my final opinion on it was that Thamos, through his censorship, might have done more damage to the adoption of crypto in the world than any other single person. And I want to put that to you and try and defend it, because you say it had no effect. I think that's what you just said. And
on the people who are in the debate, running nodes, the developers, the miners, the businesses, like, I don't think that had any effect. In fact, I think because they got to play it was clearly that Thamos was kind of being a dick. I almost want to say it led sympathy toward them, but I'll let you defend the argument first. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, my argument is not that everybody didn't know about it was the problematic part of the censorship. I think largely in part by, there's a lot of Chinese miners. And I mentioned this in the conversation with her, you probably remember it. I said that I think there's a strong cultural thing in those regions that push them to fall in line with the consensus. And so when mining institutions, because the individual miners we are not even worth talking about when it comes to Bitcoin in terms of hash power percentages, we're talking about large mining institutions. When they have to answer to their boards and they have to justify their decisions, having the Bitcoin core devs basically say, look, if you support these forks, we're going to remove you from bitcoin.org. That's a clear bat signal in the sky to the institutions to that the risky money is over there and the safe money is siding with Bitcoin Core. And I think that argument on its own right there is enough to show that it had it could have had, or probably did have, a big effect on the situation. Because even if it only influenced the Chinese mining institutions, I think that was the majority at that point, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. What do you think?
The Chinese miners, they were the majority of the miners. Yeah. In context to the cultural difference in like trying to squeeze the decision making, I guess, is there were a million different plays on both sides of the aisle. Like the censorship on Reddit was not the only thing that was going on. And in the context of like the Chinese miners, I really think the bigger issue was really about the user activated soft fork, about calling the bluff of the miners, because nobody wanted a fork. Nobody wanted to fork the network because it meant that you forked the liquidity. It means that you forked the monetary value of this thing. And everybody was trying to do that. The reason they wanted to get 88%, 90% of the miners to sign on is because they thought it would prevent a fork. And all of the people who thought that this was a very bad decision, myself included, were now switched to running a client, the UASF client, that said that if you don't activate at the same time, if you fork off, we're going to specifically exclude you from the network while we adopt SegWit, which is the supposed compromise that we thought, but nobody really wanted to compromise. Everybody just wanted their way to work. And like even the SegWit people were like it was like I said, it was a mess. The thing is that the network advantage, the game theory advantage was always on what was in protocol consensus, because the bulk of the people had no idea what was going on. The bulk of the people weren't participating in this. Bitcoin is not just Reddit. Bitcoin is not just the miners. There's an entire.
You just said earlier that the Reddit censorship was immaterial because everybody already knew. But if most people didn't know what was going on, then the censorship would have had an effect.
I'm meaning that everybody who was involved in the debate. I'm meaning that not the everyday user. I'm meaning that everybody that mattered, everybody who was deciding on a client or deciding which way to go with this miner or that, none of them were unaware. And all of the other people who there's still just these people who just bought Bitcoin and had a wallet or were doing something with it, and they were about to get kicked off the network if we did this fork. It was going to be this. It was going to be trying to get everybody on TCP/IP version 6, essentially, and getting everybody, like calling up everybody and be like, get a new router. Yours doesn't work anymore. And just like, what? I got on the internet and now what? Like it fundamentally have broken every piece of software from being compatible to the new network. And so they wanted everyone to be on the new network. They were trying to get as much as they possibly could to essentially require that was going to happen. And everybody started spinning up nodes and saying, I'm not going to. That you're going to fork off, and we will fork off and happily take 10% of the mining power because we believe the game theory, the Schelling point, is going to lean our way because nobody wants to lose money, and everybody's going to lose money when this happens. And that's when they started selling futures on, was it Bitfinex? Was Bitfinex around back then? Bitstamp. Maybe it was Bitstamp. I don't know.
I
One of
didn't know
the
somebody
major
sold
exchanges
futures on the Civil War outcome. That's
somebody sold
hilarious.
futures on the fork, and for a little bit it was contentious. Nobody knew which way it would go.
Yeah.
And then the futures contracts for Bitcoin Cash, or not Bitcoin Cash, the SegWit 2x, which was the kind of the contentious one during the soft fork. SegWit 2x started to plummet. That's what convinced them. Is the market was saying, we think this shit's going to lose, and they didn't want to lose money because they're going to be mining a chain that cost them an enormous amount of money. And all the user activated soft forkers were saying, we will wait. I'll take 2-day blocks. Don't even give a shit. It doesn't cost me anything to verify my node and keep my network running on the Bitcoin rules. It costs you a fortune every single day in mining. And if you're going to be mining a fork coin, you better hope it has a bigger market. And it didn't. The futures market clearly showed that the fork wasn't going to, and that's why they abandoned SegWit 2x, like literally like a week. It's like a week before it was scheduled to go. Everybody was like, we have full support. Everybody's on board. It's all going to happen. It was basically a bunch of exchanges and the Chinese miners agreeing and stuff. And then when the futures market heavily went against them and all the node operators were, it's like a big social Reddit thing. It was like beating my chest, and it felt good. I thought I was important. But it was, ultimately just a bunch of people fighting and bitching. But I think the game theory played out exactly what we thought, that the game theory is on, you don't break the network, and that when you have a huge monetary cost in the value, everybody's going to swing back towards consensus when it comes to the protocol consensus, as opposed to whatever social consensus is. An intolerant minority can defend that consensus, I think. That's one of the fascinating things about the way the game theory of Bitcoin works. And what's funny, and Jonathan Beer actually talks about in the block size war, is if they understood that game theory properly and understood how powerful the Schelling point towards what the rules are today, they could have actually won by user activated soft forking our SegWit, the soft fork for SegWit, because they could have kicked us off the network and they would have been the ones that stay compatible, and they would have turned our soft fork into a hard fork, and we'd have lost. Granted, you still would have had 1 megabyte blocks, but they would have been the more powerful element, and they could have maybe pushed for a different compromise. It's a really bizarre and kind of interesting dynamic in the way, the different power balances are when you're talking about like actual fundamental changes to the protocol. So there's an interesting element that they could have stopped SegWit if they had really wanted to. But again, I don't really think they wanted to. It just got to a point where everybody just wanted the other person to lose, or wanted the other group to lose. But yeah, honestly, they still tried to, like I said, launch SegWit 2x, like a small portion of people who were still involved. But then, like I said, they had an off by one bug, and it never actually produced any blocks. It crashed on launch. So,
okay. Have you been sued by Craig Wright?
Not yet. Not yet. Jesus, that guy. I'm glad that Roger Ver came to his senses about that, because I've always wanted Roger Ver to just kind of, like, he even joined Keat. I'm not sure if you know about like Hole Punch protocol.
No, I completely tuned out of crypto from post Civil War until my conversation and reading of Roger's book. So I
gotcha.
I considered it a legacy failed tech and moved on with my life. So
yeah, I would consider reading. I would consider reading the Block Size War, 100%. I think it's like kind of prerequisite, because it doesn't really take, like, Jonathan Beer specifically does believe that the non-forking position is maintaining the higher value case of Bitcoin, but he does a wonderful job of being extremely sober and nuanced about it. Like, it's not called saving Bitcoin liberty, like the opposite of hijacking Bitcoin. It's not a conspiracy that big blockers were trying to kill everybody or do the opposite, right? And make it so nobody could run a node. He's just trying to detail out everything that happened. And it's almost funny. He almost had like a defeatist, like, if we can't agree on like this one little issue, holy shit. Like, how difficult is this going to be to tackle larger problems down the road?
Yeah.
But if you look at like kind of the history of protocols in general, like the history of the internet, like when you're looking at foundational protocols, there's no way for it to not get that level of contentious. And that's why I think there's just so much heated shit even to this day. And he kept hoping that Roger would just kind of like bury the hatchet. And I would like to, like I said, I was a fan of the guy for quite a while before those opinions diverged on the issue. Well, then he like came into Keat and he jumped into the Bitcoin room, and then no disrespect, I mean, I know you like the guy, and I'm not trying to throw shade or anything, but he just, like, the very first thing he was posting was just block size war block. Like, it was just, this is shit. And, you know, and I was just like, oh my God, like, dude, come on. And granted, he has reason to be defensive because everybody was just going to pile on top of him anyway. You know, you got a bunch of Bitcoiners in the room. So it's not like, I'm sure he came up with his guard up and his sword out ready to fight. But it's just like, I thought like we could get excited about this peer-to-peer tech and the fact that we have like a chat room without any servers. That's a crazy awesome thing that I didn't even think was going to happen. I've been following peer-to-peer protocols for ages, and Hole Punch has accomplished something that I was wanting to have in 2007 when the internet wasn't so damn centralized as it is today. And, you know, finally, almost 20 years later, I think we actually have this tech. Like, I'm super excited about it. I was like, okay, Roger can just come in and have fun with us and have a conversation about it. And then it was just like immediately, oh God, Reddit in 2016. I remember this shit.
What is the tech?
And that's why everybody left Reddit. That was the other thing, is Thamos, he killed the subreddit. The subreddit became nonsense after that.
What is the tech in question? Is it still a thing?
Moved to Twitter. Oh yeah, no, 100%. I use it all the time. I just had a meeting on Keat.
I want to look it up.
It's called Keat.
Is it?
Keat is the chat app built on top of it.
Can you spell that?
But the KEET, like parakeet. And if you want to dig into the kind of like platform of this thing, go to pears.com. PEARS.com. Like the fruit.
All right, cool. I'll check that stuff out. Thank you. Okay, yeah, so I want to. Is there anything that you wanted to cover in our chat today regarding anything I've said or anything in Roger's book or anything in that episode that we haven't covered that you want to talk about or sort of get out there?
I would say Roger argues it, saying that he knows the intentions of all of these people. And I think if you understand the fundamental difference, it's hard to say anybody actually had ill intent, because I think the argument is sound. And like I said, the block size, just increasing the block size seems like an obvious choice. But Bitcoin is not an easy thing to understand or change. And I think the idea of thinking about it as an application layer tool, like it's a web browser or something, I think is the wrong way of thinking about it. And monetary competitions are winner takes all. Like, the whole purpose of money is to enable specialization. And if you do not have the liquidity of that money, then you basically, that ability, like, you can't have a million different monies, because essentially you're just creating the barter problem in tokens rather than the barter. Like, the reason you need a money is so that you have this universal way to measure a car against a banana, because there's no way to measure those two things. And if you have car tokens and banana tokens, it doesn't make it any easier. You just need a liquid network between cars and banana trades, which doesn't make any sense. So the more monies you have, money is necessarily a universal thing. It's very similar to language, except again, it's actually lower layer, because if you have a common money, you can actually get across having not the same language. And the only reason we don't have, even though we kind of have a dominant money, we have like 80% of trade, I think, is still in the dollar. And before that, it was the British pound. and you just kind of went from one dominant to another dominant, and everything else is just on the fringe. But the only reason the fringe even exists is because all of the governments force you to use it. So they just all have geographic monopolies. Everything outside of that geographic monopoly, essentially, and even within most of those geographic monopolies, when you're not even allowed to use it, still leans to the dollar. And I think one of the big problems in the cryptocurrency mindset is, or the having all the different cryptocurrencies compete. Like, I think that's the net benefit when we're talking about monetization, is to have a bunch of different paths to try. But I think the monetary assurances trump any other arbitrary characteristic because it's a protocol stack and you can build those things on top of it. It's just not easy to build those things because you actually have to invent peer-to-peer cash that scales to 8 billion people, and we haven't done that yet. I want to. That's the whole point of all of this, to have privacy, to have sovereign transaction, to have everybody be able to own it, and to be able to keep this shit safe from the state. But if your foundation is already making those trade-offs at 10 million people, 100 million people, you're not going to make it very far, because you're going to have to make that trade-off again and again and again and again and again until you do just have Amazon and Google running it. And then in that case, why not just have the Federal Reserve do it? It's cheap. PayPal's cheap. I can use it, right? I mean, that's kind of the same argument for custodial, is that if you're using PayPal, why are you using Bitcoin, right? So it's just a really difficult problem. And I think the simple intentions are not going to win the argument, because we don't know what anybody's intent is. Everybody hated each other. The whole thing was an absolute mess. And if anybody had bad intentions, okay, I still think the reason things played out is because kind of the fundamental game theory of the network. Intentions or no, the consensus overpowered, the actual network consensus overpowered the attempt to make us change in the social sphere that required everybody to upgrade all at once. And that's kind of the reason Bitcoin is powerful, is it's extremely hard to change, which means you know that 21 million is 21 million. You know, if you have one of those fucking UTXOs and you've got 100 blocks in front of it, it's not going anywhere. Not going anywhere. Millions and millions and millions of dollars and megawatts of energy have put a force field on that shit, and it's stuck, whether you like it or not. And on top of that, we can build all sorts of crazy shit. Most of those things are going to require trade-offs. Most of those things are not going to be perfect. But I think we have a hell of a lot of cool solutions. And I wish we would all build on top of Bitcoin, because I think it's the best base to build on top of. But I think it makes sense also to keep forking it, keep figuring out the other ways to do it. I have no ill will against people. Like, I felt like I had this obligation to like protect people from the scams, because there were so many scams in crypto. It was such a mess, especially 2017, 18, 19 period. And I got burned with a bunch of stupid shit at the time. And I don't think I properly understood that winner take all element of money, like how much the feedback is. You're going to have a dominant money, and everything, all of these tokens are just arbitrary tokens. They have to compete as a money before they compete as a payment network. Because the value of it, the reason you accept something as payment is because you want it. It's because it's valuable. Like, people talk about, like, you know, you have to, the Keynesians will say you have to incentivize people to spend money by making it shitty. It's like, no, you spend money because that's what the other person wants. That's what the person wants to accept. You don't have to devalue a car to get people to get rid of a car, like, or to get people to buy a car. The reason people buy a car is they want the car. So you have to make something that is valuable, that has some sort of a use case that you can't get somewhere else. And what Bitcoin provides is an unstoppable consensus about whose ownership it is. And I think the Bitcoin Cash and the whole block size war is actually an example of why it's so reliable, is why, you know, because even when there's contention, when people are screaming and absolutely vicious at each other, it still couldn't change. It still couldn't fundamentally change. That original consensus remained. And Yeah, I guess that's
Okay, all right. So I think what I'd like to do now is sort of wrap up with some of the many viewer questions that we received. The cream of the crop, not all of them, but we'd be here for 3 hours.
Or if I take 800 years to answer.
Oh no, that's fine. Let's do a few as rapid fire as we can, viewer questions, and then I'll give my final thoughts, and then I'll let you have last word with your final thoughts, and then we will be friends for the rest of our lives because we both want liberty. So
that sounds awesome. That sounds awesome, sir.
All right, cool. Okay, so we got a lot of questions. TRLRDR asks a question for small blockers. Okay, and to be clear, I vetted these for tone, not for accuracy. So some of the premises could be wrong, and you're welcome to call them out, okay? I just didn't want any assholes torturing my guests. All right. That's fine.
I'm not even...
Small blockers claim blocks must be small, so requirements to run nodes are small and cheaper, but what good is that if they just eliminated the majority from being able to use it or conduct transactions due to insane transaction fees? So what good is the ability for more people to run nodes if nobody can spend it?
What would be the point of running an audit for the Federal Reserve on your computer that allowed you to basically evict any banks from your network that started printing more money or issuing new debt out of thin air if you weren't directly using Fedwire? I would say there's still an enormous value to that. And if you want to go back to the idea of like my analogy of Bitcoin as a ultimate financial court as to who owns what, that there's this tank that says at the end of the day, this is the owner, is, you know, if you only know that you're going to get a fair shake in that global court by running a full node, then you run a full node, even though you're not going to go to court every day. You're going to be running a node. You should run a node because you don't want to get a judge that can be bought or that is dependent on a third party. So your ultimate ownership in a layered system is still about being able to enforce as you go down that layer, go down those layers to the base layer. And you hope that your ability to enforce it just keeps it cheap and easy to make that enforcement. And I think forever there will be periods of high fees and periods of low fees. And it will just go in a series of additional improvements, incremental improvements, major breakthroughs, new protocols, et cetera, et cetera. So there will always be there will always be sunny days. But I also think there will be like really bad, serious fees at points. Without question, I think it's inevitable. Again, to the court analogy or the Fed analogy, like if you're not always using the base layer, but when the shit hits the fan and you are actually in conflict, the base layer is going to be the adjudicator as to who owns what. So, and you're only going to get fair adjudication if you run a node. I wish more people understood it. I wish more people were running nodes. I actually think that's a problem. Like it's something that we need to focus on. It needs to be easier to do. I mean, it's relatively easy. But you think another big part of the security element isn't just like, can people keep up with full nodes? It's what happens if like some sort of serious bug does hit like half the network and you have to start a bunch of nodes from scratch. Like that's an enormous loss to the decentralization and security of who owns what in the system and the ability to prove it. And if you've made blocks or capacity and bandwidth requirements big enough that people can only just barely keep up with the tip, you're never going to go all the way back to the beginning and start. It's just going to take you 6 years to sync a node from zero, but you still don't know. Just like Bitcoin Dark, just like Ethereum, you have no idea if those coins you have actually followed the rules. So it's a trade-off, and it sucks. I wish it didn't have to exist, but I think the alternative of we're just going to raise the block size forever, and somehow that sovereignty isn't going to be threatened, and it won't be controlled by a few people who are determining what the rules are, I think is a fairy tale. So I prefer the messy trade-off to something that I don't think exists. But yeah, I wish more people would run full nodes. I wish people understood that incentive more. But that's one of those right now, I think.
I think if I had to push back on that, it would be something along the lines of, well, let's make whatever changes that we need to make to the technology now so that we can get people to actually start using it. And then when we do start hitting the greater end of the spectrum scaling problems, then at that point we can start worrying about it after we've already gotten Microsoft and Steam and everybody using it, actually using the technology. Rather than sort of strangle it while it's still in the crib, like is what happened, where the large companies stopped taking it. Like, I can't buy stuff. I can't buy my video games on Steam with it anymore. And that was a decision made based on incentives that were done on purpose.
Yeah,
that would be my pushback.
Completely understand. I understand that perspective, and my kind of like summation of the alternative would be to go back to the idea that I don't think the bidding network is going to be a good retail payment system. And if we set in the precedent of we're hard forking every time we need to change and we're responding, there's not going to be a time in which it's easier to bite the bullet and make sure we have that. It's kind of like saying that, like, you know, we'll vote for Ron Johnson now and then we'll be like super libertarian anarchists later after we have power. But if you give up the fundamental principles early, it's not going to get easier to enforce that. It's going to get way harder, and then everybody's just going to be like, well, we just hard forked the last 3 times. Why don't we do that again? And then at the same time, it's a question of like, okay, can you do that? Can we make a change to the network and have everybody update and make a breaking consensus change so that the old software is incompatible and we have a new network that's outside of those consensus rules rather than a backwards compatible soft fork of something? And so far it seems like we can't. Like, all the forks are just forks. They just make another altcoin. So we can try. Certainly not. Doesn't seem to be easy or very successful. And a lot of people want to say this, like, oh, 5 developers are stopping that. I just don't see that as the case. Nobody, like, I'm not running Bitcoin Core because I care what the Bitcoin Core thinks. Like, there's clearly a network effect there, but I don't think it's any sort of, I think given enough time and enough push, you can clearly get away from that client. But I don't know. It's not an easy problem.
Bitcoin core dev Luke Dash Jr. famously said, then just use fiat in 2017. I didn't know about that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
He's just being an ass. He's just being an ass. Everybody was being an ass. Sort of shit. There's comments from everybody saying all sorts of stupid crap.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a Twitter, and like, Luke Dasher doesn't own or doesn't control anything. I disagree. Luke Dasher thinks that, I mean, with respect to the guy, I like the guy. He's awkward, but he talks about like masturbating is like evil, like send you to hell. So like, there's plenty of things that I disagree with Luke on. Plenty of things I disagree with everybody on.
I only masturbate to JPEGs on the blockchain.
All
right.
God.
There are many locations There are many locations around the world that have, quote, high local crypto usage. Free state areas like New Hampshire, Bitcoin Cache City, Townsville, Australia, and many others. Yet BTC is typically not used in those locations or anywhere equivalent. Why do you think that is? We were just kind of talking about this. Is actually a question that goes to my point. It's like, look, my mother could have been introduced to Bitcoin if it was accepted by retailers that she wanted, if it had gone that way. And then my mother would already be, hi mom, if you're watching, would already be like in the habit of and comfortable with using a cryptocurrency, so that someday when Bitcoin hit the scaling limit, which I agree is a thing that it will hit because it's an inherently inefficient database technology, then my mom would have been more comfortable learning about this new crypto that came out that solves some of these problems, or an alternative layer, multiple layer tech. But instead, what happened was Bitcoin is out there now as this sort of risky, really expensive to use, contentious money that no one accepts anyway. So the switch flipped in her head and she's not interested. That's scary. So I guess back to you on the same freaking topic we've been talking about for 2 hours, but yeah.
I think it's putting the cart before the horse. Is if we had a bunch of adoption of the broadcast bid layer, I don't think it helps us. It gives us a bigger challenge later because it's not going to scale. It's not going to work as the application layer. And at the end of the day, everything's going to have to, all the infrastructure is going to have to change anyway. And the monetary assurances are, I think, very clearly by the market are the more valuable proposition. Is this a monetary policy that the state can't arbitrarily change? Is this a monetary asset? Because then we will build all of the applications and payment layers on top of that. But it has to be necessarily desirable. It's fun if you care about the arbitrary, like the peer-to-peer cash, right? Like everybody does care about that. The Bitcoiners do, the big blockers do, everybody does. Everybody wants that as the end game. But if we are using the technology that doesn't do that at scale, we're just going to reach that problem at a different point, and it's going to be harder. Again, do we bite the bullet now, or do we expect that we're going to bite the bullet later and we're going to not have this awful, contentious, hellish fight in 6 years when we're just right back here? And then fundamentally, the base layer of the network is a lot harder to deal with. We're going to have JPEGs on the chain with 50 megabyte blocks or whatever the hell it is. And we also are expecting some sort of a fork to solve the problem because the layered approach is way harder.
Look, if my butt pictures are not in 4K, then they might as well not even be on the blockchain.
Just why? We better have 4K, 8K, 8K yes. VR butt pictures on the
internet is getting less reliable as we go.
The hard path? Do we take the hard path now? Thamos is censoring us. Do we take the hard path now, or do we take the easy path and think that we're going to be okay with the difficult thing later? Especially when even making that change, just there's contention. Again, you have to make everybody agree, and we were not able to do fact. So I think if we're just getting ahead of ourselves, we're wanting layer 3 to work for everybody right now, but we're trying to squeeze that into the layer 1 experience.
All right, two last questions, then we'll wrap. How long till quantum computing can decrypt everyone's wallet passphrases? I'm familiar with quantum computing from another space, unrelated to crypto, so I will defer to his opinion on this.
What's your? I have had the hard time to find good on. I've gone down this rabbit hole a couple of different times because obviously it seems, I talked about like the 5 different types of security, and I said crypto is just like is it all of this? Doesn't mean jack if the cryptographic primitives don't hold up. But I cannot find anything good or solid about it. In fact, I went into kind of having this sort of conversation with somebody who was supposedly like somebody really big in quantum, or just like, I guess, a Twitter influencer about quantum. I don't know what you call that. And he linked me to a paper that was like 4 years old that proved that you could factor a 2-digit number faster than a normal computer. And I'm like, and it seems like the more they try to scale the virtual quants, or what do they call them? Oh God, brain fart. I haven't gone down this one in like 6 months.
No. Hey, that's fine. Look,
I did it again like, 6 months ago. I have not. I'm increasingly thinking that that's a lot less of a risk that's further out the more I dig into it, and the the virtual quants, I cannot remember what the hell they call them, seem to have a different scaling problem. Is that like they can get the appearance of the gates, but then they run into an exponentially larger error correction problem as they scale, and that it just doesn't seem to scale really well. And Moore's law seems to keep running against this other resistance. But again, I can't find solid information about it. And generally, find something concrete that I can understand, or a research paper that makes some semblance of sense. I usually think people are just trying to get investors. And so their claims are big, their words sound great, but it's not at the top of my concerns. We have a lot of other problems. And I think I would like to see them break SHA-1 with a quantum computer first. Then we should have a very serious discussion. And unfortunately, it's going to take a hard fork, which is not going to be easy to do, but that'll be necessary if we ever get to that point. So expect a really fun consensus there.
The symmetrical encryptions are the resistant ones. It's the public-private key pairs that are going to be at risk. And I haven't studied the Bitcoin tech, so I don't want to comment outside of my area. I would rather just do the noble thing, which I wish more people would do, and say, I don't know. But in terms
That's
of...
kind of where I am, but I lean towards not worried.
Yeah, I lean towards worried because the threat model, that the decentralized nature of the cryptocurrency technology is, the threat model at the top of that list is state actors. And the first people that are going to have functional quantum computing that can break it is going to be state actors. So it's
That's fair.
I think it's a big deal, and I suspect that we're going to find out about the government's quantum capabilities on average about at a 10-year lag. So 10 years after they have it, we're going to find out they had it. 5 to 10. And I think the tech is 5 to 10 out, which kind of makes me start to be suspicious around sometime around now. They might be able to reverse their first wallet key sometime around now. Are we going to find out about it? No, they're not going to do it on anybody that is going to talk about it. They're going to keep it, some of the most private, some of the most classified tech on the planet for now. Anyway, that's my opinion for whoever cares. All right. Let's see. Oh, so this is the Samourai wallet question. We kind of briefly talked about this. Samourai wallet founders have been arrested for money laundering. This was a Bitcoin wallet with some privacy features turned on by default. They didn't last long enough to even make an iOS app. What do you think the implications on Bitcoin are? I think is basically the question on this.
Yeah. I mean, it's not good news. Sucks. Samourai wallet. I mean, I don't agree with the guys. They're pretty contentious dudes, and they attack the hell out of people who.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of contention in the Bitcoin space, and actually, it's a little bit reassuring to me that like there's a lot of people who be like, they're assholes, but this is wrong. Like, and the interesting thing is that like the precedent that would be set if they get prosecuted. Like I said, I think a big part of the problem is that they kind of boasted that dark web people can use this, and people you can get rid of capital controls and all this stuff if you have private Bitcoin and use our service. But their coordinator did not have. It was basically information batching service. Like they didn't money launder because they never signed for any money to move. They couldn't. It wasn't their signatures. They weren't controlling any funds. They're batching data that users sent to them. So it's a really, really bad precedent and a very serious regulatory attack vector if they can just make it super broad, because all of the regulations currently are about, do you have custody? Because then you're a money transmitter if you hold custody. But basically all of the layer 2, all of the coin join, all of these things, the good protocols, the good systems are designed to enable a service without custody, without them having control. So if they can make it that broad, it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of shift. There's going to be a storm on Bitcoin. And I wish we had base layer privacy, but it is not an easy problem either. And there's few, like we have like things that have boosted privacy. Like just the idea of layers in general is actually a pretty significant privacy boost because you're working off chain. Like one of the most private things that you can do to spend Bitcoin is to actually open up a Lightning channel, anywhere on the network, open up a connection and then just spend, because the sender actually has amazing privacy. All you get is an onion routed packet for the payment. If you receive a payment, you're creating an invoice, basically broadcast, here I am, this is my channel, pay me. So if you only send, you actually have really fantastic payment privacy. Whereas obviously coin joins are the UTXO version of that. Well, how do we separate somebody being able to say this UTXO is this person? Kind of like the IPv4 problem is that my grandma just got prosecuted because somebody downloaded BitTorrent in her house, and it wasn't me. I don't know what BitTorrent is. It's her IP address. Like, how do we make? But that was actually a really big, powerful point of regulatory or a legal defense, is that an IP address doesn't find a person. An IP address is a house, a location, a router, basically, or a modem. And so it sucks. It sucks. We need better privacy tech. I wish it was more of a focus. I think it will be. Anti-fragile social systems humans in general tend to not fix a problem until literally it punches them in the face. Like we procrastinate and we're like, oh, we'll solve that later. This is more fun. This is a cooler feature that we want. And for better or for worse, the people with the wrenches are coming. And I think privacy is something we need to double down on and like focus on a lot, because it's not solved. Privacy is a huge, huge issue. And I want us building heavily on that within the monetary consensus.
Well, that was the end of the questions, kind of at the end of the interview. I would like to give my closing thoughts so that you can then have the last word for sure with yours. First of all, I really appreciate you joining me. This has been fun. You were very pleasant to talk to.
Good time.
You had cogent things to say. I can tell you're a concerned
You're a super
liberty.
piece of shit and I hate you.
Fair. You were pleasant to talk to. You had the thick skin that's needed for existing on the internet, so that's good. I guess where I'm at, my position is still kind of unchanged, if I'm honest. Well, I started out not interested in using Bitcoin.
To change your opinion.
No, that's what I do, man. I want to find out if I'm wrong. I'm just still too skeptical of the technology. I can't use it even if I wanted to on several of my wallets that are at the bottom of a lake right now. That's the technology telling me that I would be dumb for continuing to try. I see the issue that we highlighted here that I haven't heard from the other side is the admission that the tech probably can't actually scale to the world. I think that's a valid point and a valid problem that needs to be designed around. Unfortunately, I don't think Bitcoin is going to be the one to do it because it's so stagnant. It suffers so fatally from the tragedy of the commons, the lack of leadership, the lack of hierarchy. There is no one person that can be like, this is a problem. Here's the vision. Here's the purpose. Here's the changes we're going to make. Start coding now. We're going to release in a month. And if you don't, you're going to be fired and I'm going to hire different developers that do a better job. Like, that's how companies make viable products. Instead, we have all of the viciousness and infighting and division and hate that you talked about. This is a direct result of the fatal flaw of the leadership of this kind of product, and that's intractable. It can't go away. Every time there's any kind of change, you're going to have a hopeless amount of infighting and hatefulness and division and risk of loss of value and everything that you already know because you lived through it more than I did. That can't go away. It's the model of the leadership of the tech that I've lost faith in more than the tech. I think Bitcoin is super cool. I really want and need a freedom money that that separates government from money. I think it has to be driven by a competent team that's in charge, that can set goals and deadlines like any other company that wants to have a productive, successful product. But that's not going to happen. So I hope Bitcoin works, but I just don't see it. So I'm kind of focused elsewhere. And that's like, why would I risk my money and my attention on this thing that I see a problem with? Okay, so I've said that enough. The last thing I'll say is I think another effect of the model, the leadership model, is that there's a lot of anonymity, which leads to a lack of reputational risk when making bad decisions, or when procrastinating decisions, or when delaying decisions. If Bitcoin fails tomorrow and the price drops super low, because the miners adopted a version of it that, I don't know, did something that just broke it or whatever. We can just pick something. The people that are going to suffer the blame are going to be the amorphous mining institutions, or, you know, the core devs that approve the change. You know, like, there's no direct accountability. There's no direct consequences to a specific known set of people. Always. I mean, sure, everybody suffers when their balance goes down, their number goes down or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. There's no one's reputation on the line. There's no competition between one group and another. That's not really true. I'm being too general, but and then the final thing I'll say is, look, I'd use it if I could. I would say that my final reason is I'd use it if I could, but I can't, because I refuse to be emasculated to pay $20 to $100 to move my money to somebody. That's embarrassing. No, thank you. I think, and so my hope for the future is that people, like, the thing that makes technology different than traditional money is that it's so exchangeable and so mutable between different currencies. Like, no other currency in the world, if you wanted to swap USD for Canadian whatevers, you have to go to somebody and hand them money, and they hand you money back, or you have to, you know, use a website and wire transfer to them and back. We could have an app that does atomic swaps between 5 coins instantly. So we could have, and this is my technologist brain, and I'm not going to go into my idea for how the problem could be solved, but you could have instead of layering vertically Bitcoin, then Lightning or whatever, you layer horizontally. You just have a bunch of different currencies that have built into the protocol the ability to atomic swap with all sibling currencies within the family. And we have technology would be great at translating between and exchanging between currencies through atomic swaps. That's like what technology is best at. And then we scale. Then we can scale. Anyway, that's kind of all I have to say, aside from just the general compliments. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for coming on. I hope we can have you back in the future. So I'm happy to have you.
I appreciate it.
Go for it.
Yeah. Thank you. And I completely get that perspective. I don't think there's, like I say, you know, I think when we admit or come in with the framing as what I think one of the most important pieces of the puzzle is that that bidding, like you said, it's the most inefficient database in the world, is that's not going to work as the application layer. The question becomes, do we deal with that reality early and, you know, go the difficult route to getting full peer-to-peer cash for everybody? Or do we kick the can and think that we're going to make that difficult decision when it's harder in the future? And so I think that's one of the really big fundamental differences in the two perspectives. And going to the idea, the reason I actually like your notion of maybe we could have a bunch of different networks and a bunch of different monies and we could atomic swap between them, because these things are programmable. You could do that without, like, it would not be a technical problem. But I think it's a huge monetary problem, because one of the fundamental things that is a decatrillion-dollar problem is the mispricing of capital, is the ability to fundamentally manipulate the cost of time, the cost of using capital over time, issue debt out of nothing. And the only way to fix the pricing of capital, the only way to have a truly global economy that does not have friction, that does not have huge, massive cost in liquidity differences, is essentially to have a dominant money. And I think no matter what direction we take it in, I mean, technically we have that with all the cryptocurrencies, right? We have a bunch of different networks and technologies and things that we could use, but it's not who we're going to call to be like, let's just use these 5 in tandem. It's not playing out that way. And I think it's because of a serious monetary, a winner take all dynamic of the monetary asset problem of what do we want our value stored in that encourages us to use it as a medium of exchange. And I think our excitement over wanting to solve the problem of privacy and payments and all of that stuff has essentially put us focusing on the thing that is the third step in the process, as opposed to making sure that that first step is unstoppable and there is nothing anybody can do to get in its way. So that when we get to the third step, we really did solve it. Like we solved it for good, as opposed to just get Microsoft and Steam and Overstock and all the people to, use the base layer and throw out their bids and, use zero conf. And, we pushed it. We got 10 times as many people on board or 100 times as many people on board. And we used it for 5 years. And then we ran into this problem and we still had to have this argument. That argument isn't going to be nicer 5 years down the road. And the dynamics are not going to be any easier. It's going to be a big hell of it was an awful mess already, and I will say I'm an optimist, and I push back the idea that it has stagnated. It has not stagnated in the way that the path is actually, I think the path is actually sustainable to take. There's a massive amount of stuff going on with L2s. We thought that the programmability of Bitcoin was extremely limited, and there was we were only going to be able to do 6 things with it, and there was no way that there was an alternative. And in just last year, somebody has created a super crazy system where hidden inside of a Taproot script, you can essentially have any completely arbitrary computation that you want control the ownership of that Bitcoin. I think there's an endless amount of innovation that we can do within the consensus rules. Like I said, it's just harder. It's just slower. It just means biting the bullet now so that when we do solve the problem, we actually do solve it. And we may have a 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This sucks for a little while problem, just like we did with the internet. But I think the invention of Bitcoin is the internet saying, let's take 2 more steps forward. We have a whole ocean of people trying to build decentralized and peer-to-peer protocols again. We have an ungodly amount of capital to the people who give a shit about that stuff. Look at what we are able to argue about and what we are able to commit resources to building for the people who care about. The cypherpunks were nobody. 12 years ago or 20 years ago, nobody gave a shit about the cypherpunks. There was a collective 800 of them, and they didn't have any capital to expend, and they were the fathers of most of what happened on the internet. SSL was created in that crew, BitTorrent was created, WikiLeaks was created, all of the fundamental protocols and things on the internet. The bulk of them really created in that tiny little community. Think about how much, aside from all the argument and all the bitching and mine's better than yours and I solved the problem and I can use yours at Walmart, whatever. Aside from all of that, just think about how much capital and caring we have today to devote to this problem. I don't think Bitcoin is our limitation. I think Bitcoin is the big, slow, dumb rock that says, this thing's at least not going to break. So let's figure out how to build a city on top of this rock. And I think that's its value. I think the fact that it doesn't have a clear leader who can make a change is why it is that rock. And I think there's an enormous amount of innovation, things that we can build on top of it. We just can't use it like the web in the same way that in 1990s nobody had the internet walking around in their pocket. You know, it wasn't until 2009 that the iPhone came out, but that changed the game. And I think we have that capacity. I think we are going to do it. I think we are going to have money that the state can't stop, but it's not going to be easy road. And it doesn't come with easy decisions either. And the block size, that whole fiasco was a really hard decision. It was a mess. And the idea that there's like a clear good guy and a bad guy, I think is disingenuous. Everybody was an asshole. It was awful. And simple fact, the protocol consensus won because nobody could decide to change it. Like, we could not come to agreement. So the people who wanted to change it forked. And that became a fork because that's how the protocol works. So it is what it is.
Very good, sir. Like I said, I very much enjoyed it. This was very pleasant. I hope the audience appreciated this. They were all but demanding that I talk to you. I would have anyway, but they were adamant that I give the other side its due, and I'm glad I did. This was fun. I appreciate it. Man. I look forward to more in the future. Where can people find you?
So many people who refer to themselves as Bitcoiners are not easy to talk to. The social sphere is something else a lot of the times, but
it's the pseudonyms, man. If your face isn't behind your words, you just say the dumbest stuff sometimes.
That's the thing, and that's also another one of those trade-offs, right? Like, I think there's a if you're pseudonymous, if you don't really have your reputation and your face on the table, so to speak, you aren't taking as high of a risk. But then at the exact same time, you're more likely to speak your mind. And when you're working in this sort of a sphere, your risk is incredibly high. We still don't know who Satoshi is, and I think he was smart. Like, I think if Satoshi is still around, he would already be in prison
get sued
for what he created. I'm 100% about to get sued.
All right, man.
Shit.
We'll wrap it up there. Where can people find you?
Oh, yeah. Bitcoin Audible is the podcast. We read about all sorts of stuff around Bitcoin. AI Unchained. I'm more active on Nostr than I am Twitter, but you can actually get to all of it, I think, from my Twitter. I think I have my Nostr key in my Twitter profile, but I'm the Guy Swann pretty much everywhere. I try to just steal that username, the Guy Swann. Swan with two ends. So
how's back up? How's Nostr doing? The last time I looked at it, the clients were dog poo-poo on PC.
Oh, I love it. I think it's you got to find the ones that work well. I'm a big fan of Primal, Damus.
Give us the best one. Best for Linux, Windows, and iOS. What are the best?
Okay, iOS, I think it's Damus. There's No Stir, TUR, I think is the other kind of the one that I really kind of enjoy. Which one is it? There's my icon. Amethyst on Android for sure. I tend to go primal.net on just like desktop.
Okay.
It seems to be the most responsive, but yeah, Primal's a good one. Primal's a good one for desktop. There are a bunch of them. Check out Flare and Highlighter though, because they're kind of like, Flare is the YouTube of Nostr. Highlighter.com is getting really, really good, and it's kind of like Medium, like use your Medium account. And if you want a really good wallet to start playing around with Lightning, and use a browser-based wallet, Mutiny. And you can log in with your Nostr account. So like when I set it up, I just clicked. I just said click and go. It's pretty cool to have a public-private key social network because your account, your profile follows you everywhere. And logging in is just kind of like clicking on stuff. You sign. But yeah, that's worth checking out. I love Nostr.
Guy, thanks for joining me. It was a pleasure. Everybody, thanks for watching.
It was a great time.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate your questions and your concern about hearing both sides of the argument and forming rational decisions to believe the truth based on reason and evidence. I appreciate you guys caring about the same things I do in that regard. Everybody, I will see you next time. Peace, love, and anarchy.